for Planet Green.
We have launched.
We've completely launched. We've started the show, and it is Planet Green Trees. We're about to embark 2 hours of medical marijuana and marijuana reform in Michigan.
Attention, ladies and gentlemen, the Planet Green Trees show is underway with your host, attorney Michael Komorn.
Alrighty.
We have launched.
Welcome, everybody. Strap in. Get ready. We are about to launch. Anticipate Planet Green Trees. The capsule is leaving the base. Welcome.
Hopefully she doesn't blow up.
Planet Green Trees TV. Today's date is 11/11, the year 2021. We're calling tonight's show Blatherskite. Blatherskite. For those who are in the know, they know what I mean. But it is generally, Blatherskite is a person who is prone to speaking nonsense. William Shakespeare play Much Ado About Nothing features a character named Dogberry, who is a bit of a blatherskite. He speaks nonsense throughout much of his time on stage. This is a week of a lot of blatherskite this week. That's appropriate. Anyways, I'm your host, Michael Komorn of Komorn Law. You're listening to Planet Green Trees, Michigan's #1 show about cannabis legal issues, licensing, regulations, compliance, medical marijuana topics, current events, and other legal matters. And we have a fantastic show planned here. We have a guest calling in, Cass Coleman, associated with the Botanical Company, if I understand things. She's going to be helping in the conversation about the topics that we plan to go through here. And let me discuss those for a minute here. I may rant at some point. I'm not going to give any notice or warning. Of course, these topics may or may not be covered, and at any time I may add a topic that's appropriate. But one of the things we may get into is...
Let's be honest, they probably won't be covered.
Probably will not be covered. We just talk about them as an intro. Michigan's governor signs bills ending medical marijuana license ban for people with past convictions. Also allowing for elected officials who were previously banned from having marijuana licenses to permitting that. Next, Whitmer joins a bipartisan call to pass federal cannabis banking regulations. And this is the city that has the most cannabis retailers in Michigan. And Center Line, and then, of course, the clean slate.
I'd say per
the clean slate to be able to drive legislation. I don't know if we're going to get to any of that. But I don't know who made this list either. I'm not responsible. It's episode number 539. Here are the people in the studio that are going to help us figure all this out. First, we have, of course, the technical supervisors, also known as the Bunker Boys, Tommy, Justin, and Dangerous Dan.
Dirty Dan.
Thank you guys for helping start the show on time tonight. Next to them is the one and only founder of Michigan Parents for Compassion. His name is Jim Powers.
Good evening, Michael. Good evening, everybody. It's great to be here. Looking forward to the show.
All right.
Jimmy the Pepper.
Yeah,
we
baby.
have Steve Miller to my immediate left. He, of course, is the rover here at Komorn Law.
Yes, sir.
All things necessary to get accomplished. Please welcome Steve Miller.
All right. It's good to be here. Forward to a good show tonight.
All right. A lot of pressure on you for that. Moving to the Zoom room, we're joined by Amanda Joslin, whereabouts unknown, but a YouTuber in her own right. Wasn't there, like, in the middle of the week, something was going on, and Dan's like, Amanda's doing her podcast. Oh, Steve had to go talk on the podcast.
Yeah.
He had a break.
Yeah, which we're going to get you on, too.
Okay.
So
All
we've
right.
got that happy Veterans Day to Steve.
Thank you.
To say that podcasting is a thing, that would be an understatement. Please welcome Amanda Joslin, podcaster.
No, it's not my podcast, but it is Can of Conversations with Danielle from Lady Jane Wellness, who came on the show. And so we're doing some stuff together, but it's primarily her podcast. And so Steve came on Wednesday, and his episode will be airing soon. I think Tuesday, actually. Tuesday he came on. And then I'd love to have you on, Michael, to discuss some of the licensing things in Michigan.
For sure. Look forward to that.
Make sure you edit out anything bad.
Oh, you know we will.
That's a good thing about not doing it live.
That's
You don't have to worry about
Little snip here,
Yeah,
little
that's
snip
right.
there.
little snafu just disappears.
You're not doing it live, is what you're saying. You're
We'll
No,
do it
we
live.
are not
That's
doing it
tomorrow,
live.
and that is it
Not
for us
doing it
today.
live at
And we
all.
will leave you with
But we've got about
can't
3
do it.
weeks worth of material now.
We'll do
So
it
if you
live.
guys want to take a look at it, go to the Midwest Canna Concierge dash online,
all right.
we'll
and
do
you
it
can
live.
find it,
All right.
and YouTube, of course.
Let's see. We're joined by again, whereabouts unknown. It could be anywhere, really. If you think about it, it could be really anywhere. Jeff Frazier, attorney and internationally renowned lawyer and guitar aficionado, iguana lover. Jeff Frazier.
Hello, Michael. Hello, everybody. It's always proud to be part of this gig.
Appreciate you being here, catching up and stuff. And of course, the one who was responsible for a lot of stuff. Sometimes he's taking it, sometimes he's not. The one and only Jamie Lowe.
Been having to accept a lot of the blame for stuff lately. So I'm
Wow.
having to respect it, but I'll make it through. I am looking forward to tonight. My colleague, Coleman, we've been able to work with a lot on these political issues that we've been having to deal with, and they've been very helpful. And in addition to that, the mechanical company, but really Carbonex is the umbrella of the integrated cannabis company, and Cass is currently working on adding the last component of the lab and building that out. And then there'll be Franklin Field Botanical Company, and we'll have to check with them, but I think the lab will be called UNA. Well, I'll check.
Wait,
What's that?
you're cutting out a little bit. Are you saying that Cass is part of the botanical company? I know you got the grow license for.
Yeah, the entire vertically integrated operation.
Oh, you're joining
Yeah, so you said
forces with some
botanical
folks?
company. No. When describing Cass, Michael said botanical company, and I'm pointing out that not only the botanical company, but the entire vertically integrated operation. And Cass is currently building out the last component, which is the processing lab.
Okay.
Okay.
I misspoke.
You're getting mad at us, Michael. I think I feel a little bit of anger being spit.
I
Well, I mean, there seems to be a lack of communication at large in the world right now. So to make sure something is understood is kind of important.
That suggests that I'm
Agreed.
somehow a contributor to that, Jimmy. I'm the opposite of that. But nevertheless,
I threw it out to the world. I wasn't being very specific
all right.
about.
But nobody knows the parent company. Let's just be honest. You're not out here. It's like saying that I'm a part of Botanica company. I got the parent company.
No,
I'm
but
part-
people do know Franklin Fields, and it's
Okay.
cool to know that there's even more going on, and
All right.
that kind of stuff. And I do want to. So one of the things that's been, a couple of things that's been extremely helpful with having Cass around for a lot of these meetings, is that the MCMA and Steve Linder and company have really been confusing a lot of the lawmakers, whoever they can, about the caregivers have too many plants, and they should be testing this medicine. They shouldn't be going to patients without being tested. And so those are two big things that we've had that we still have to overcome with the lawmakers. And Cass has just been awesome in those discussions. And I think that there'd be some interest in a little throwback discussion to the stuff that was uncovered in the police labs, like during the Lorenz era and those bizarre strategies that were taking place and who was working with them and stuff like that. I think there'd be some interest in a little bit of that discussion tonight if you're up for it.
And just clarify, her affiliation was the full vertically integrated, and that is there a name for the full integration parent company that makes it easier?
Well, the Carbonex is the umbrella company that those companies are housed under, but individually they are Botanical Company, Franklin Fields, and I believe, we'll double check with Cass, I believe that the processing lab will be called UNA Labs.
You're calling it lab, and
Laboratory.
there's
And a lot of processing places call themselves labs. It's not
I
that
understand.
uncommon. And I don't even know if that's part of the
that
name
right?
for sure. I threw it in there just as a common
Well,
title. That's all. We'll find out the actual stuff.
well, we
Wow.
those types of activities would usually be conducted in a lab, I would say. Like it's
It is definitely under all those types of conditions.
A sterile environment is what you're like, that type of
Yeah.
lab.
It is. Well, there's an extraction that takes place using, chemistry equipment and stuff. So it's a lab. You know, there's a,
It's
it's not a
science.
testing lab.
However, it's
Yeah.
well, that's what I'm saying. Like the processing license is to process marijuana. It may do it in a building, a lab,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it.
You can call it whatever you
A
want.
lab is what is in charge of testing. You know, the testing facilities are. I say that because there's an inherent confusion because only the marijuana licenses can be vertically integrated with themselves. It can't be a transporter or a tester within the same, entity. They're prohibited. But I understand what you're saying, and I'm sure there's a lot of. I have a lot of questions for because there's a lot of growth and development and obviously new technology and market share of what's being sold in stores, supply and demand. So I'm fascinated to hear how that thing is unfolding. Before we try to find a topic here, let's get an update, Jamie. What do you know about the bills? I know there was some stuff this week. I don't want to really highlight any of the other terrible podcasts that try to compete with us after we've been doing it for like 500 whatever shows. But there was some stuff that was going on this week, a lot of like intra-fighting, which I found to be troubling and almost like part of the recipe for what the
The MCMA.
MCMA would want. But and I think most of it has been resolved. But tell us where the bills are, other than tearing apart the community to some degree and causing all these issues, independent of who's right or who's wrong. What is the status right now? I know a lot of claims have been made that they have been.
Sure. Well, I mean, I'll just say that regardless of what anybody's opinion is, it is for sure that without Robin Schneider and the Michigan Cannabis Industry Association taking the position that they have and doing the work that they have, we might not be in the position that we're in right now, and we would definitely be in the midst of a much more difficult challenge if we were even able to be successful in holding these bills off. So no matter what anybody thinks, Robin and the Michigan Cannabis Industry Association should be recognized for that fact.
Are you giving credit in this instance? I'm saying this as a interviewer. Are you giving credit to this fact to Robin and the Industries Association, or if a vote was taken, do you think the vote of the Industries Association would in fact be to stop the bills or be opposed to the
They
bills?
did. They have a process, and they have a legislative committee, and they have a board. And the legislative committee first evaluated the bills and voted unanimously to oppose them, and then it was sent to the board, and they voted unanimously to oppose them. Robin submitted a card on behalf of the Industry Association that they were in opposition on the first day of the committee hearings, and has been extremely helpful, including participating in and hosting Lobby Day last week.
No, I understand.
And,
I
and even though not directly involved with this dinner that you heard the controversy over, was very also helpful in many components of that dinner.
Understood.
So I just want to make sure that that's clear. No matter what anybody thinks, that's a fact. That's a very important part of this. It has been a very important part of where we are right now, and where we are.
Wait, let me just ask one question. And with that being said, I didn't, because I do want to clarify this. I wasn't sure because I got the impression during that a debate and really not unnecessary kind of whatever, and not a place to do it. I don't think people need to do it.
It's weird, yeah.
But nevertheless, there was some. It may have been all in the heat of the moment, but there was some
Strategically, just
threats
not a good idea.
Not a good idea, but there were some like threats that were made that seemed to suggest that position of the of the Industry Association.
Oh, the MICIA.
Oh yeah. So
was
when
arbitrary.
Robin was saying,
Was arbitrary, and it was not like a unit, like an organized decision. In that the offense that was being taken could result in
Right. I'm about ready to explain that.
Okay.
And I think I know what you're talking about when Robin suggested, would you like us just to, stop being involved or something like that to Ryan. And you're calling this a threat. I think she was pointing out, I think she was trying to highlight and using that wording in order to shed light on the potential consequences if they were to do that. I don't believe that at any point they were actually going to because she just felt
I understand.
Hurt by Ryan that she was going to stop this whole operation or change their minds over it or anything.
No,
she was pointing out their significance in the process, I think.
And I think it's important to point out too that I think a lot of the reason that the MICIA members are not supportive of something like this is that Robin has taken a tremendous amount of time and effort to educate people on the medical system and on the caregiver system.
She was a caregiver
exactly
for like 5-6 years. And she had clinics downtown in Lansing, and she worked with our original industry association. I mean, she goes back as far as anybody.
Right. So, I mean, I think it's important for people to realize that, whether or not you agree with all of Robin's politics is one thing, but she, consistently has had our back over the years. And, again, there's been times where there's been disagreements and whatnot, but, she has done a lot and continues to do a lot for caregivers and patients, primarily because she was so connected. She was a caregiver. She was a patient. And, the drug war also touched her family in a real way. And, people need to realize I believe she's doing it for all the right reasons and, has us in mind.
But he was working on it today. And has every day. And just want to report your original question to me before we went off on this, but I'm glad we did. Is where we stand and right now.
Because I just want to finish this. I thought you were arguing, and I was prepared to give Robin the what you were saying. Like I was under the impression from that maybe the organization itself was not fully on board. Maybe they were hedging. Maybe it wasn't as unanimous as you said. But Robin's leadership carried it over the line, and it was actually much more, it was vastly.
A lot of members of that organization that come from caregiver backgrounds don't really understand that world, don't want anything to do with hurting it.
We've got a question from Adam Brook in the audience tuning in from Amsterdam. He asks, would the 325 plus members of the MICIA agree with how their board voted? I think that's what you guys were just talking about.
325, they agree when they buy into the membership and become part of the organization that's how decisions are made. And they're familiar with the people who are in those positions. And so part of that process, as I said, first it goes through a legislative committee to consider it. So it's more extensive than just a few people deciding,
We can all
they're fine with it.
So the takeaway is we can all understand that this organization, and again, the use of the term caregiver, I think, has constantly been misplaced. The word war was lost when they were able to capitalize on that and make the caregiver seem like it was associated with the illicit market. The illicit market is something else. Caregivers are defined in the law as something else. So that was always misplaced. But even, from an objective standpoint, as it relates to the illicit market, it's not difficult to understand first that those paying taxes and, participate in this highly regulated industry may not appreciate the illicit market because it's competition, but that's fine. The premise of it is not to try to prohibit it more, but create more access and more equality and more competition, because competition in a capitalistic market is what's best. But nevertheless, we are stuck with this very tightly regulated and low access to from. But we can understand why businesses may be of that group, how they may have, looking for any way to prevent competition. So, I would say this, that when you have only two organizations that are in charge of and speak for the industry, and both are against caregivers, that would be a disaster. So Jamie's point's well taken, and I think
it'd be a huge problem. We would be having a completely different conversation right now.
I'll tell you, I mentioned before that some of these issues that have come up and confused the lawmakers, have been difficult to overcome. And Cass, who is on here waiting to be a part of this, has been very helpful in getting that right information to them. But in some cases, it was a matter of pointing out to some of the lawmakers that the industry does not support this. That this is just driven solely by the MCMA and their 10 or 12 members. But the MICIA, the biggest industry association, is actively opposed. And they have been surprised to learn that.
know,
that's helped them to get better perspective just alone.
understood. I'm thank you for clearing that up, because the idea that Ryan Bringold could cause the MCIA to jump would just have been, so ridiculous. But nevertheless, thanks for clearing that up. We do have Cass Coleman, who has joined us. Thank you for joining us, Cass. I don't want to keep you waiting over there. Appreciate you taking the time to join us via Zoom. How are you tonight?
It's a good day. Yeah, worked hard, here talking to you guys, making my night better.
All right. Jamie's already belittled me for not fully explaining the association you have with the various vertically integrated company. Why don't you tell us so I don't try to butcher it again? What are the entities and companies that you're working with and for currently?
Yeah, so I'm the director of quality and processing for licensed cannabis operator here in Michigan called Carbidex, which has a retail front of the botanical company and soon to open processing facility called Una Labs. I sit on the board of Americans for Safe Access here in Michigan, and I'm a very active member of the National Cannabis Industry Association, working with the Policy Council as well as the Scientific Advisory Committee. I speak on cannabis legislation and testing safety requirements across the country. And I've worked very hard to make sure that all consumers, patients, and recreational users have access to safe and affordable cannabis. That's what I've done for almost the last decade, and I absolutely love it.
Are you originally a Michigander, your hometown?
Oh no, I'm from Kansas City,
Okay.
So I'm a Midwesterner, but not a Michigander.
All right.
I made it to Michigan via Colorado, Arizona, California. So a bit of a little circular route there. Now I'm back here in the Midwest. It's much better for me.
All with your eye on the cannabis plant as the
yeah.
job? All right.
Yep.
Let me ask you this. So we've been speculating. You heard some of that conversation with Robin, and I'm not trying to over dramatize it. I know everyone's on the same page at the end of the day. Nobody wants the bills to get anywhere. But do you have it is a good question. Jamie's not one of the members. I'm not. We're not there to hear the input from the other members. If you can talk, do you get the sense that it's? I mean, you stated a background that you have that is, has a objectivity and in a wider empathy for the persons that may be engaging with cannabis. Business is business. I'm not saying you can't have business with some empathy or, compassion, but there's this drive right now in this competitive commercial market, and there are two industries. One is clearly define themselves as, wanting to destroy all for whatever reason, and even fraud and lie about it. Is the organization that you're part of, are the members, the 500, 300, whatever members, are they equally as passionate on the issues that you describe in what you support?
So she said the NCIA, just so you know, National Cannabis Industry Association.
Okay. But
I think you heard her. I think you probably thought she said.
All right.
Yeah, and I do participate with Robin. I go to her events. I have great appreciation for her knowledge of how the laws changed here in Michigan. Anytime I have a concern, I call her, and the company that I work for and represent now is also a member. I've met a lot of members since I've been here in Michigan because of the events that Robin has put on. And in general, I would say that most of us agree that these laws are inappropriate, that we should be increasing access, not decreasing it. Mostly because the more access we have, the less stigma there is, right? And stigma is currently, I don't know if everybody else realizes this, preventing about 60% of the population from being interested in cannabis. So, if we can even get half of those people to be interested, their lives will be improved and all of our businesses will flourish. And that means having neighbors that grow cannabis in their own houses, that you can go to their house and see that it's not, crazy. I mean, that's what that's about, right? So.
Well, great minds think alike, and as you know, the Canna Jam, which Botanical Company participated in, and you were very helpful in schooling the other retailers that needed to make some metric adjustments the last time. I know you made yourself available for that. But our whole mantra was like, stop the stigma, one event at a time, stop the stigma of cannabis. So I'm with you on that 100%. You're not going to get any disagreements out of me. And you are hearing these things because of your involvement, I'm sure, as it's filtering down from, I don't know if it's Russ or whoever else is the quote-unquote member for the, or the representative that's getting the emails or, asking to vote or input. But, and it goes without saying that Franklin Fields, the entities that you are working for and opening up, Botanical, is in favor of caregivers and opposing the bills. Jamie would not show his face in public if it wasn't that way. We know that. But
yeah, and it should be known, like, not a little bit, right? Actively participating in making sure we have education available, putting our money where our mouths are, sending all of the members of our executive team to participate in lobby days and rallies and showing up in municipalities and writing letters of support and supporting lawyers, doing the activities, across the state. I mean, I've probably spent, a couple hundred hours since this bill came out doing nothing but lobbying representatives, rewriting language, figuring out what to do if it passes through the House, and what kind of changes can we make in the Senate to limit the impacts, because money does talk on Capitol Hill, and, supporting anyone who asks, our team to show up. And it's not just one person on our executive team either. It's all of us looking at each other and agreeing unanimously that this needs to happen because we care about the human beings that live here in Michigan, their access to medicine, and we don't want any limitations on that.
That's excellent. And I commend you for finding that company, one that, has similar beliefs. And it's kind of impressive, I would say. Jamie, good job if you had a lot to do with that. And you too, Cass, but because we could say it's not every entity is acting like that. We know that's not the case. That is a unique, and of course, cannabis market and commercial is unique in its infancy and whatnot. And obviously, other approaches are being taken. We can say that about the MCMA, and one could even say in other industries it may not even be that, indulgent in these other areas where they'd be more focused on just their own development in trying to get rid of the competition. And you've been really good at answering my question in a very promotional, not suggesting any negativity at all. And you don't have to. I was just curious if it's across the board. Like, not every MCIA entity does what you just described. Not every one of them. I can't believe that. You don't have to pull it out. I'm just curious, like, because if everybody was like the Botanical and all, Franklin Fields and the ones that you're opening up, then I don't think we would even be talking about it. They would have gotten nowhere. There would have been, financial resistance through these entities. Like, they would have become a lobby for the caregivers, kind of, if that's, but I don't think everybody's like that. Some of them may be neutral, some of them may be former caregivers. But anyways, if there's a sense that you have that you want to offer, please do. If not, I want to ask you some other questions.
Every member of MICAA I've met supports the organization's activities to make sure these bills don't become law.
Excellent. Okay.
There's not a single member that I've met that has said anything contrary to that. And in general, I think a majority of the members that I've met are in communities where they see the impact of caregivers, as well as having come from caregiver roots almost exclusively. So, these companies are participating in the legislative process because they have participated in the ballot initiative process before. Sure. And I think a lot of members of the industry association were looking for a place that would do that with a little more oomph. And when you have 300 organizations working together, you get that.
Sure.
Because otherwise, you're buying, your live well, buying lobbyists from, around the nation. And, smaller companies can't do that.
Is it true that, that's a fascinating fact that all of them, but is it true that, is it divide really like that you got a caregiver, like the many of the companies are original caregivers that transition to licensed entities, or I mean, can you say?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like even last night, I met 4 additional people, members that I'd never met before, and except for one, they were all caregivers who had gone into the license market, and the other group was still a caregiver organization. So, I mean, it's every time. And, even with my company, our head grower, our cultivation manager, 2 members of our retail staff, a number of our cultivation techs, our owner, we're all caregivers. And if you look at the numbers from when caregivers were allowed to start buying licenses, like the number of caregivers in the state has dropped off by almost 50%. It's not because those people aren't participating in cannabis any longer, right? They're just doing it in a different way. They're participating in a larger commercial market, which potentially makes sense if you're looking to make cannabis your career and looking for more remuneration, right? Because, there's limited opportunities with 72 plants. And, you're not supposed to be selling
right
for more than your cost, right? So,
well,
I mean,
you're really not supposed to sell to anyone beyond your 5, but that's
yeah. So
that's
even to your 5, right? You can't. I'm not 100% sure the way it is enforced, but you're not supposed to be making money on it. You're just supposed to be recouping costs.
Well, I think I would say it like this: if there was a question of the Medical Marijuana Act being a law that provided guidance on commercial activity, the answer to it became beyond well known when they created the MMFLA. Like the MMFLA was like, this is how the commercial industry looks like. And I think if you say like, well, one is void of that, the other one has that. But I don't know. I've never agreed with that concept that you have to break even or lose money. I think that's been a fallacy that some of the law enforcement have tried to, it's in the enforcement thing, which has always been arbitrary. And a lot of patients, caregivers have been forfeited, felonized, fucked up by the policies and enforcement of that. And it's a tragedy because I think it's one of the messages that resonates most for the caregivers now. Like they not only had to go through the growing pains of, the law enforcement community, which somehow took over on the public health issue of medical cannabis and somehow made it a public safety issue, which has never been explained. But after they did all that, zero training to law enforcement. It's hard to take, 40 years of the best propaganda campaign ever about the evils of cannabis and change, and then one law passes and change everybody's mind. You have to put effort into rewiring that. That never took place. And
I don't agree with you.
Caregivers lived through that for a long time. I'm talking from 2008, 9 to 2000.
I know exactly what you're saying, but
right.
the idea that they couldn't just shut it off is bullshit. They went from fireworks being illegal in Michigan, and then they were legal, and they turned it off.
Well, they didn't. It didn't get turned off. They turned it up, and there was no education. It was all about the enforcement. We had Bill Schuette. Right.
But my point is they chose to do that.
Okay.
It's not just because it was
there has to be an effort from the top to want to change the way that things are. That did not take place. Caregivers, and then, of course, you have the evolution that when the MMFLA rolled out, they had no source. So hey, caregivers, all that stuff that you've been doing illegal, come back and do it here and make some money. So that's where we are. That's where we are. And but it was interesting. You thought that the reduction in caregiver numbers in the state were related to those individuals becoming licensed. I have never thought of it like that. I always thought it would have been because there's more sources now that patients could get cannabis.
Or their patients.
Yeah, so I thought that
patients
too.
are using the stores. Yeah.
I thought that too, and I was like, I wonder if it's because there's been an exponential, going to dispensaries. But then you don't see that. Like you see these drop-offs. So every month, the MRA puts out these numbers to say, oh, okay, so now there's another, 115 licenses that are out that have been issued, right? And then another month of 115 licenses that have been issued. At the same time, they're showing a reduction in the number of caregivers. And they're like, at our facility, just our one facility is like 30 caregivers no longer in the system because once you work at our cultivation facility, you can't be a caregiver any longer, right?
Sure.
Your license expires.
Sure.
And like So if you said, okay, so for each one of those licenses, you had, at least 10 caregivers that now are working there because they already work with the plant, they have the skills, they're being recruited, all of those things, plus the people who actually own the businesses. Perhaps all of these businesses are different, but we love to employ caregivers. If they want to work with us, they already have the knowledge of the plant, they had passion to get involved to begin with, they're the perfect kind of employee.
That's true. And I would say it's probably not that way across the board. There are many entities. It may not be your entities, but the corporate model of hiring and conceptualizing and policy and, procedures and protocols are not the same. But everyone, and, but here's the problem. The issue with the MMFLA is with all of its tight regulations and oversight, it never once contemplated the end user price, right? There's the ability to be able to put on and compete with the caregivers is always a challenge because there's so much more that, cost per gram, I guess you would say. But the phenomena, I think I talked about this a couple weeks ago, like stepping back, putting aside what the reasons are or what the explanation is, these are realities. Number one is the caregiver population is shrinking. Number two is that the patient population is shrinking. Three is that the totality of the commercial market, which used to be 50-50, well, first it was 100% for patients, then it got to 50-50 real quick with recreational. Now it's like 80-20. So the totality of the market, it doesn't mean any fewer people are using as patients, it just means more adults over the age of 21 are using, but still, that market and the percentage of sales in each of those markets will drive the businesses to a certain extent. They're not going to try to get. The patient base is what it is. Maybe it goes up, maybe it goes down, but it's not going to make or break the business by facilitating that. And I'm not saying everyone does that. Jamie is chirped up oftentimes when I say that. Well, some of these companies will just make special. Patient cannabis and, give them discounts, whatever, because it seems as if the movement of this is going to go to one type of license, not medical and recreational. So, but I said all that, just hypothetically, agree with me for that, because the point being that since the MMFLA has been in effect, and now that the recreational effect, the industry is destroying the patients and caregivers. It's shrinking, caregivers are dropping out, fewer and fewer patients. And if the bills pass and they take out the caregivers, and it's true that we end up with one type of license and it's 100% rec and no medical, what has happened? They've completely destroyed the medical marijuana program in Michigan. I could see that happening over time with the drive of commerce, the market, and, kind of assuming the patient population and not caring about it and being left, not every business will do this. Obviously, some will target patients and, cater to patients and care about patients. But the numbers I'm talking about from from financial, business-driven, I could see something like that happening. I think it's a tragedy. What do you think about that? Do you think there's any chance that we're going there if these things happen with the bills passing, if they pass?
Yeah, I think, so I've been in other states where the people who are pushing these bills, who are multi-state operators, have also push these bills and then gone to remove home grow activities or co-op growing activities like we have here in Michigan across the state. It's happened in Colorado, it happened in Washington. They're trying to push for it really hard in California. And of course, everybody in California really doesn't give a fuck. So that's not going to happen there. Could it happen here? Certainly. The erosion of these controls to make the world focus on only having to be able to buy these products from dispensaries, from state licensed organizations.
Yeah.
That's what these big business companies want. Like there was, right? Then they've been very successful in other states. There's no reason to think that if we weren't fighting tooth and nail here, that wouldn't happen here.
And that really should be, and this is the problem of leadership. When the state, we have ballot initiative legalizes marijuana, which was not a legislatively created thing. There's no consensus. None of the representatives of the various communities represented and passed a law based upon the desire of their constituents. The people had to do it themselves. And after that happened, the leadership did not. The leadership sat down at the peace table and got the losers who didn't want it, and they're involved with. That's one of the problems. There's a leadership issue in this state and other states. Now, you mentioned California. Jeff has done practice some law out there. I'm curious to your thoughts, Jeff. There was an article, and I don't think it's a doubt. California is proclaiming that the licensed market cannot compete with the illicit market. In fact, I think there's like government grants going to the cannabis businesses to try to re-energize them into out of losses. So, but that's I'm saying like that kind of thing, those kind of realities, all the investment stuff is what drives the kind of the type of legislation you're talking about. I understand what you're saying. Jamie was, and this may have been a source of UCAS, but the idea that the big state operators of the Wall Street won't invest in states that have home grows and caregivers is the messaging I've understood. And therefore, as it gets through to the legislature.
I don't know about that.
Okay.
The 3 largest cannabis investment firms in the world have invested in major companies in the last 6 months in the state of Michigan, which has a robust adult use and medical home grow system already in place. I think most companies at this point are looking at population density, cannabis stigma, and the turning of that tide and number of people who are interested in becoming consumers, as well as looking at things like, cost of real estate, friendliness of local law enforcement, those kinds of things, to make their decisions. I came from one of the largest cannabis companies in the world when I got recruited to come up here to Michigan. These things are interesting to me, how people think, they are somehow against these things as far as where they're going to expand to. They want to be in every state until it's federally legal, and they don't want to spend too much time making it federally legal.
No, I agree. I agree with that. And I don't know that making it federally legal helps any of the industries at the time. I mean, it might, but it certainly is.
Yeah. And I think also I would say that in general, the large entities across the country are not profitable. And those that are owned by investment groups that are looking for 30 to 100% returns year after year after year cannot become profitable. It's just not possible. And it's an incredibly bad business model. And I've seen it multiple times in Colorado, multiple times in California, where people build these, $60 million facilities thinking that they're going to get $15 to $20 a gram because some consultant somewhere told them that was realistic, when in reality, all day, every day, you can buy cannabis on the street for 40 cents a gram. You can buy cannabis in Oregon for 40 cents a gram. You can buy cannabis in Colorado for 40 cents a gram. So wake up and stop thinking that the profit is going to be $15 to $20 a gram, and look at reality, which is that the average person can't afford to smoke 10 bowls a day if they have to pay $20 a gram for it. Right? So you got to make it more accessible, and you have to have your business model and your business plan so that it is accessible in that way. And the companies that are doing that, some of them aren't licensed, and they've been doing it for decades. And they're quite good at it, and that's who the licensed market is competing with. When you go to California and somebody wants to sell you an ounce, and you can get that ounce for $35, and it's decent, if not good, and you have to walk into a dispensary and pay $260 for that same thing plus taxes.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no competition there. That's just not how it works.
Right. And the way that a business who's losing into that market would do is they'd try to create laws or have prohibition continue. Like the licensing creates new prohibition, which I fear tax and regulate is becoming in Michigan. And the real the loss of not being educated from the legislative standpoint is the failed lesson that prohibition simply doesn't work. And there's got to be some other strategy to neutralize these issues. And it's certainly not creating a marketplace that, as you described, this is the cannabis in Michigan. You got to buy ours. There'll be no others. That is never going to work. Never going to work. The idea that the state could ever, in any time, control the economy of cannabis when they couldn't do it before is insane. The idea that they're not letting those that they can't control and that economy into the economy they want to control is absurd also, because more rules and regulations and prohibitions are not going to stop the behavior. It's a lesson you thought we would have learned by now. And we don't have to talk about cannabis. Just go back to alcohol, which I am advocating should be reconsidered by the legislature to be prohibited. I do think it's time for us to revisit that.
Don't agree.
It is a Schedule 1. It should be Schedule 1. There's nothing, no value in it. Causes more death and danger than any other.
But people should go to jail for possessing it.
Schedule 1. They should be searching houses, kicking in doors if they smell it. Yeah. Alcohol.
It's been too glorified
Take
by
it up.
society.
They should be.
Prohibition doesn't
they
work
should
for
be
anything.
arresting those companies.
Thank you.
They should be arresting those companies.
Person. Prohibition doesn't work. We know it doesn't work. It causes death. It causes destruction of families. It leads to inappropriate and unfriendly law enforcement interactions, which nobody wants. And I mean, there are lots of substances on this planet that I choose not to consume because they're poisonous. Educating the masses so that they know, hey, this is poison. There are options that aren't poison that make you feel just as good. You know, perhaps that is the avenue. Coming out and creating a more intense police state. I mean, we all know historically it doesn't work. Well, plus, that's my tax dollars. I don't want people's doors being kicked in because they're choosing to poison themselves.
But the police leadership today tells you that that's all necessary. They got to do that to keep society under control.
Keep the kids safe.
I mean, there was an article that was out on the Safer Mish this week, and it had two quotes from the leader of the Sheriff's Association in Michigan, Dan Fanis. They used to call him Peanut when he was in narcotics. And then Bob Stevenson, who used to be the chief of Livonia, who's now the leader of the Michigan Association of Police Chiefs. Both former drug warriors their whole career. And I was telling Michael the other day, that's who's leading these law enforcement agencies today, is all of these guys who made their way up. You know, they got a lot of kudos and everything else, and attaboys and promotions and all the way up to the top.
What do the articles say?
They were talking mainly about the driving and how
marijuana impairment.
Because marijuana has been legal in Michigan, it has had a great dramatic increase in the number of injury and fatal accidents in the state of Michigan.
Correlation does not equate to causation.
And if any of that were true, they'd be able to.
Mountain report thing.
If any of that was true, they'd be able to point to it and identify
but
it.
They don't, and they don't point to any facts, and they just state things vaguely, and they throw a couple of percentages here, and there's nothing to back it. But these politicians sit there and listen to them because they consider them stakeholders at this table.
But the problem here is that they are telling the lawmakers that science is on their side, and that's what we need to dispel. The fact of the matter is they do have more positive tests for marijuana at accident scenes in the last 365 days than they've ever had. Is it because more people are driving high? No. It's because they are testing more people for marijuana after accidents.
First of all, the testing that is being used is not test, it's witchcraft.
Of course.
Okay, that's number one. Number two, the data that the Michigan State Police did a report that codified that on the issue of should the state of Michigan come up with a per se limit of THC, they said no, because whatever the amount in the blood does not correlate with impairment at all. You could have 1 nanogram and be stoned out of your mind, and you could have
their own
200 nanograms.
Work group said this.
This is what they said. So this nonsense, this is like the stuff, this is like during the legalization campaign, the Police Chiefs Association's position was driving, it's dangerous, cannabis, dangerous. And the real problem is this. As police officers, we have a very difficult time determining probable cause that a crime's being committed.
Yeah.
It's hard for us to find a crime.
A lot easier if we can just say there's a
There
crime
is no
'cause we
crime.
smell weed.
The admission, the admission that they can't identify the probable cause of a crime means there's no probable cause that there's a crime.
right. It should be
The difficulty of it is just that they think it. They can witchcraft it, telepathy wise.
They just bring a DRE out.
But that's.
I mean, I don't look at any of these numbers from Michigan State Police, and I'm not looking at, how they're collecting data in the field and what they're reporting. But I do participate in the Scientific Advisory Committee for the National Cannabis Industry Association, which has looked at a number of clinical trials that have been performed across the country and around the world regarding inebriation with cannabis products and what that leads to as around a 30, equivalent to about 30% impairment compared to the 0.02 blood alcohol limit, right? So, not nearly as bad as a normal person having had a couple of beers, but still existing. And that, much more consumption beyond that can lead to, people doing really silly things. I think there was earlier today, I was giving a tour to DJ Short at my cultivation facility, and he reminded me that sometimes when you're stoned and you're driving, you stop at green lights. Pretty sure that's what he said, right? So, you do strange things occasionally, but there is clinical evidence to show that there can be impairment, and that can lead to more accidents and the like. That doesn't necessarily mean that there are any good tools to check this in the field, because currently there are not, although I'd really like to see some. I think most people would, so then police would leave us alone when they think that we've done something wrong while driving. But I'll also point out that I don't know very many people who wait around to make sure they're not high anymore before they get behind a wheel. And drunk driving in our country is still an issue because people really give no fucks about other humans when they're partying in general. Right. Oh. And I also know that there was really good study done in Colorado, which actually took the data and wasn't just randomly collecting it once and saying, oh my God, look, it's 1,000% increase, but collected it over the last 6 years and said, here, as more and more recreational users are happening, here's the additional deaths. Here's the deaths that were on the road that the person who died also had cannabis in their systems, whether or not they were high at the time. Right. Well, and it was an exponentially high increase in traffic accidents in the state of Colorado.
And it was associated with the population increase. It had nothing to do with the cannabis use or not. And
so it was correlated to the total amount of sales of cannabis having had an increase, and as well as the forensics for the autopsies being specific, that a vast increase, because the autopsies had always been the same. Well, people had collected the data on substances for traffic deaths for many, many, many decades. And hey, here we had recreational availability, and we saw a huge increase. And when I say huge, the average was around 360 deaths, and it jumped up to over 500, and it stayed over 500.
Okay.
And those percentages were from that. First, maybe not in our state.
I know, but here you go. The reporting that you're talking about fails to recognize a number of things. One, the period of time that the data is taken from has a population increase. So if it's this amount every single year and legalization happens and X amount of thousands of people move there and the population grows because it is a community that's been growing year after year after year, then that increase cannot be related to that. That's number one. Number two, the autopsies that you speak of were not autopsies that revealed deaths from car accidents with people with active THC. It may have THC, but it also had other drugs or alcohol. It's always the combination of cannabis and something else that is used to conflate the data of dangerous driving. In 2013 or 14, the Michigan Supreme Court ruled in a case called Kuhn that despite the fact that the existing law in Michigan was that if you had any presence of a controlled substance, namely cannabis, 1 nanogram in your body and driving, and you were driving fine, just like any other normal, prudent driver, you could be arrested, or if you were arrested and they found it in your system, it was akin to a drunk driving offense. No bad driving, just having it in your system. That was the law in Michigan. It has been the law in Michigan, and it's still the law in Michigan for under the age of 21. It changed in 2018. Wait, let me finish.
Well, and potentially recreational, right? Because there hasn't been a court case.
Let me finish. So the Kuhn case did that. That means there was, at the time, 300,000 patients that could now drive within their system so long as they weren't impaired, because Section 7 in the MMA would prohibit that.
Not impaired. I think it's under the influence.
Under the influence. Yeah. Operating under the influence. Nevertheless, if anything that is being said is true, then we would be able to say that of those 300,000 patients, there was 10%, 20%, 30% accidents that were directly related to them being able to drive within their system, not impaired, and they crossed the line. It just didn't happen. And I don't know that the data really backs up a correlation in any way. I mean, the presence of it in people's systems with other things that are impairing is usually related to, I think AAA said that, they did a whole national study. The NHTSA has done studies on this. I mean, the original Schaefer report, the Nixon, the most comprehensive, talked about it not impacting not impacting, and people are more deliberate than negligent. I mean, listen, I look for it, and I think that like the police using this as a thing is almost like some built-in, folklore, and they were very effective with this. Like it's at one point in Michigan, it was 1.5 breath, alcohol per
0.15.
0.15. It's now 0.08.
Yep.
It used to be 0.10. Now it's 0.08. They're talking about moving to 0.05. That means that people were driving around at 1.2 and 1.3.
0.15.
I know that they're driving at 1.2, 1.3, and they were fine. You see what I'm saying? Like this discussion of just deciding that the federal government is going to declare these things and form into studies. It just doesn't. It's not supported by And the other thing is all of the studies that have been made, if ever done by the federal government, funded by the federal government, the Rocky Mountain High, this Marilyn Hoistis was always. They're paying her to do reports and stuff, and doing the types of studies where you go to it could be in a campground and they would smoke government weed or and then drive and they could follow them and stuff. She couldn't even come up with it. She couldn't put it together even under those circumstances. I don't know, and I also think the other variable is that everybody's endocannabinoid system's a little bit different. I'm not advocating for people to. Non-users, first-time users, people that are not familiar with
We're not advocating that people drive under the influence of anything.
Yeah, it's not even a thing, but I just don't know that... I mean, I had a case...
Well, it would also imply that more people started using cannabis just because it became legal.
I mean, but does it though?
They did, and there's great data to show that. And also that we expect another 40 to 50% of people who are currently using cannabis to start using cannabis because their friends and peers the stigma has been reduced. If it's not going to, then the upward trajectory of the cannabis industry will plateau at some point because only people who were previously interested in using cannabis will be using it.
No question about it. And I think that, I don't disagree with that. I think that, like the rollout of during the era, the end of the tail end of when the MMA was transitioned to the MMFLA from 2008, 2009. I could think of all the major moments in events in medical cannabis that would just move the ball that much further to the point where there's 70, 80% national. I mean, Michigan, I think was 70, 80% believe it. It was unequivocal the way that shifted. So of course, and what the point I was going to make is I think the increase in usage amongst the medical population, may even be for the recreation, was people over the age of 60. That was the
it was significant.
Teenagers the same, younger 20, 25, whatever, the same. All the increases were in the non-traditional categories of people. So I agree with you, Cass, that the population is going to increase, but that doesn't.
But we also know.
It doesn't parlay into a need for fear. First of all, some other stats interesting. I think Colorado, other states will boast is that when cannabis is legal and a legal choice of something to use, the number of drug overdoses substantially reduces.
Right. 30%. It's fucking huge. I wish all people could have access to cannabis so they weren't worried about taking other drugs that were going to kill them and impair them in some way.
We're not going to disagree on any of those things. I agree. And I was going to say, Florida, the Medicare program made a study where all the opioid use went down with the introduction of medical cannabis. But why are we disagreeing about the driving thing? You seem like I feel like we're missing.
I think it's just an incomplete data set. I mean, we've talked about all these other factors, and the other factor that I brought up earlier is that the cops are just testing for it more. When we were kids, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, you were there, man. Like, if you pulled someone over because their car reeked of marijuana,
we get them for driving
before it was legal, what would happen?
Well,
I would be searching that car.
Yep.
And if I found marijuana in that car, I would place that person under arrest for possession of the marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
And the thought of arresting them for impaired driving never even crossed my mind because I didn't find them to be impaired.
That's what I'm saying. Like, it's that's 20 years of police work. I pulled a lot of people over. I was pretty active out on the road. And I'm sure a few of those cars smell like marijuana.
I arrested a decent amount of drunk drivers. I mean, if I came across one and they were drunk, they were arrested. I mean, some guys go out and that's their thing. They like to go out and arrest drunks. If I happened upon one, I would arrest them. But, for marijuana, I never arrested anybody in 20 years of police work for solely driving under the influence of marijuana. It was alcohol and something else.
Would you ever have, after an accident before it was legal, would you ever have someone's blood tested for marijuana?
No.
Okay.
Well, you have their blood tested, maybe.
Okay, so I was thinking about the 40-cent grams. I'm still stuck on the 40-cent grams over here because I think that's kind of scary when you think about it overall. I know one of your points was that, in the dispensary world, there's not really much profit, I guess, to be made. But so do you see that is what the future is for Michigan? 40-cent grams?
I certainly see $1 grams and $2 grams, and let me tell you why. Okay? Because right now I can buy on a wholesale level for $2 a gram, and we're competitive. Okay?
Is California
today I can buy grams for $2 a gram as a retail operator and turn it around and sell it to somebody else for however much a gram they're willing to pay me for it. Like that's just how it is. I know that the cost of making it doesn't need to be that much. Certainly, when I was growing cannabis in Arizona, it was certainly less than $1 a gram for me to produce it.
That's because of the outdoor growing.
Right. Well, actually, we're growing indoor in Arizona. But, if you're growing outdoors, you can certainly grow cannabis for less than 50 cents a gram. And that's who we're competing with. We're competing with outdoor grows from around North America, right? And, the more licensed operators there get, the more it's going to be. I mean, we're talking about, $100, $200 pounds of Croptober outdoor grown cannabis available right now in the state of Michigan. Now, it might not be available to you at the retail level, but there is a glut of supply. In Canada right now, they're literally burning hundreds of thousands of pounds of cannabis because they can't sell it even for 40 cents a gram. Is this the future? Yes. Should we be prepared? Yes.
What is the price per pound right now for outdoor grow, if you would share?
So we have had offers from between $125 and $200 a pound. And last year it was right around the same amount.
Dollar bill.
Wow.
Okay, so that's less than $1 a gram, guys.
What's it going for? That's for flour. What about to the processors, if you know, like cold freeze and shit?
Round that same amount. Yeah, people are paying less than $200 a pound right now to get biomass for processing. It's just how it is.
How much?
I added in the chat the most recent clinical trial for driving impairment in cannabis because I used to 100% agree with you. It's like this is just mumbo jumbo, crazy National Drug Institute BS, and we should all just stop listening to the government. And then this came out, and this is a trial that was performed in the European Union, so it's not behind this cloud, participating with a number of individuals, and it clearly showed driving impairment. And they had people get high at the time of driving, right? At various levels of high, right? And they let people say, this is how high I think I am. Some people would say, I am not impaired and still drive fine. Some people would say, I am not impaired and drive like crap. Some people said, I am too impaired. I should not drive. Which I thought was interesting because some of those people were smoking hemp, but they were so impaired that they couldn't drive. Yeah. But that's because people don't really know if they're impaired or not sometimes, right? And I feel like this
must have been some good hemp.
Epidemiological study and clinical trial was randomized and it was done really well. So as far as the science is concerned, now, does that mean that, we should be changing things in Michigan or, randomly going out and, stopping drivers? I don't think we should ever have additional law enforcement interactions.
No.
They should stay in their vehicles and just flash lights so that, people change their behavior because their police are scary, right? They don't actually need to have interactions. They can just wave. Probably is sufficient for the average person.
Pass out candy to the kids.
Hold on, this study is a crossover to a clinical of only 26 healthy participants who underwent on-road driving tests, and the intent here was it says the meaning here, although the study did not find statistically significant differences in driving performance during experimental on-road driving tests between CBD dominant cannabis and placebo. So it was only testing CBD dominant cannabis.
But I mean,
wait.
But
the effect size may not have excluded clinically important impairment, and the doses tested may not necessarily represent common usage.
That's right. So that means people didn't get as stoned as they could have. And I think it's great because it was performed in the Netherlands, where they've had legal cannabis for a long time, where they already have laws that say people can drive while they're consuming cannabis. So this was a study that was performed in a country where they're not trying to, be more prohibitionist. And it was only, 26 randomized participants, but it was 26 randomized participants in a placebo-controlled randomized trial where they collected the information, including the driving test while they were doing it, at least for the people who said that they were not impaired, so they were willing to drive. Because there were 2 participants who said, I was too impaired to drive and I shouldn't do this.
Were they hemp participants?
One of them was a hemp participant.
I love
and that person had a placebo effect, and they thought that they were too impaired, and so they chose not to drive, right? So just kind of, it was a good study. There's haven't been a lot of studies are very, just correlation. This was, here we are, the people are smoking, they're smoking in the presence of the people who are collecting the data. They had CBD dominant and THC dominant strains. They had, everyone was able to do the same thing. They took the same driving tests. They took driving tests before and after to make sure people weren't just terrible drivers to begin with. And this is the kind of study that you would hope we would do if you were trying to collect this kind of information. And what I loved about this study was they said the amounts of THC in your bloodstream does not correlate to your impairment of driving. It does not mean that being impaired is not possible, but the tests, the commercially available tests, were non-functional. And that's what made me really happy about this, because at the time people were still pushing these, roadside tests that are, breathe in this tube and I'll know if you're impaired, which makes no sense.
So you cite this study for the purpose that it shows that people get impaired from using cannabis when they drive. That happens. But the point being,
then you're saying the same thing. I don't.
Well, I don't know. But some people get impaired from cannabis. Some people don't. Some people know not to drive.
But it's the same thing we've always said.
But even the impairment that we're talking about may not be like a danger on the road. I don't know that that's correlated. I mean, I know the testing, but nevertheless, it doesn't show that this relates to accidents and causes of death on the road. You know what I mean? Like it's a law.
No. It doesn't show that. It just shows that there is a possibility that if you consume THC dominant cannabis, that within 10 minutes and within 30 minutes of consumption, there is a possibility for you to become impaired, and that impairment is equivalent to a blood alcohol limit of 0.05.
That's a tough one. I can't go there with it because I think first off, the whole premise of THC is that it's psychoactive. I don't even know what that means. That's not a scientific term anywhere. And the idea that psychoactive something means you can't drive a motor vehicle because it's deemed impaired just because you have psychoactivity, that is a stretch that has never been put together and has just always been assumed and whatnot. But I understand.
Yeah, I think also largest impairment known to man, children in your car with you.
Yeah.
Correlation very clearly shows if you have kids in your car and you have an accident, more people die, right? There are lots of things that, impair driving. Whether or not we should, punish people because of their impaired driving, I think is the key. And it sounds like we agree on that.
Let's move. I want to tell this final story because you were kind of right on topic, and I had my own kind of 26 subject test on this, and it was I had a jury trial right after the pandemic ended, and involved a person charged with driving under the influence of cannabis. And what had happened was they had an accident. They were driving in a single lane highway. Late at night, it was February-ish, and their tire got a little bit off in the road and pulled her down into the ditch, straight into a pole, like one of these. Cars all messed up in the front.
Day.
They show up, and they pretend that they're interested in her health and safety, and they take her in and do a medic exam on her. And in the middle of it, the DRE officer, drug recognition evaluator, don't call him an expert, says, "Are you done with her yet?" And he's like looking in her eyes and writing something. He's like, "Oh, now?" He's like, "No, you got to see her. You got to see her.
Card out.
You got to see her now. Go ahead now." So she gets up, walks out, and they begin to do a bunch of field sobriety tests on her. And of course, she had some cannabis in her system, and they charge her with all this stuff, trying to correlate the fact that to the accident. Yeah. And I knew that this was an important because once they get her, all the other stuff they do, the field sobriety test and the basis of the arrest was not legitimate, and I was going to destroy the officer when he tried to justify the arrest. But I recognized, just in the general objectivity as a lawyer, there's an accident, and they have cannabis, and some people will just draw the connection, and that will be enough. So during the voir dire of the jury, which we're allowed to do, they call in a pool, they get them up there, and we can kind of talk to them and whatnot. And it's a whole, there's schools to go to learn about this stuff and how to try to do it right. But I was very interested to see how many people had been in accidents before. And a lot of people had been in accidents. Yep. Many more than I ever would have thought. It was really weird. Yeah. It was really like a lot of people get in accident, and an accident is an accident.
Yep. And in that area, I bet they've had their tire go off the road just a little bit.
This is what I'm saying.
Pull the car off.
This is what I'm saying. So the idea that, and I realized when that was part of the pool of people that we had, that they were going to, without any, because all the other stuff was not, I said to the officer during one of the pre-hearings, why did you think that her failing of the test didn't have anything to do with her concussion that she had when she hit her head? Yeah. Did you see the bruise and her cheek swollen? He goes, well, the EMT guy said it was okay. I said, the
EMT said it was okay.
I said, how does he know? He says, ask him. Or something like that. It was silly. I was just going to take them apart. But the point was I still had this accident issue. But I realized when, because the idea is you can get an accident, and that's what they call it. It's called
an accident.
They have insurance for this because motor vehicles are.
And it was a single car accident.
And, but you could see the drama and liability, bad liability that may be associated with just the presence of it in there and how easily this is rolled on. You know what I mean? But the population of the jurors who've been in accidents. I'm sure many of them took medications, if not cannabis. You know what I mean? Just from the reality that their ages or know people that do. So I think the police know what's going on in Colorado that you mentioned. I'm trying to go on. Would you mention Colorado of the increased arrests? Even though that may be taking place, they can't convict them on the per se law anyways. No one on any jury's convicting them. They've ultimately stopped trying to enforce it, if I understand.
Yeah, but the Colorado laws.
These people the people I was talking about are dead, right? So no one's getting convicted. They're no longer alive.
I know, but I'm saying.
And the campaign is to be like, hey guys, you may be way more impaired than you think that you are, so you should probably not drive because we don't want you to die. And I felt like that was a good campaign because there are people who just don't get it. Like I'll tell you right now, driving is the most dangerous thing I do every day.
It's probably the most dangerous thing all of us do.
Yeah,
right? Like,
and then
your chance of dying while driving is pretty darn high. Your chance of getting in an accident and being injured is pretty darn high.
Yeah.
And, it might make me feel better to be impaired while driving because then I won't be afraid I'm going to die while in the vehicle. And that might be okay for, let's say half the drivers out there. But the other half the drivers, they should probably consider that if they're having issues with depth perception or something like that, they should not be driving. I'm pretty sure Mr. Lowell could drive and be like stoned and standing on his head at the same time.
Yep.
But I can't, right? And the rules, hopefully the law enforcement officers won't talk to either of us. That's what I want to see. But I also want to make sure that people like me who shouldn't be driving know that it's possible that they could be impaired.
And it's good that you know that about yourself.
It is. And I think that the most interesting question I don't know if it's revealed in the study is, were they new users, never used before for this study? Or, because everyone's endocannabinoid system is going to react to it differently. That's a fact. But
we do, we can all agree that certainly at certain levels, for certain people, cannabis is impairing, and they probably should not drive a vehicle.
Yeah, but don't you think that
so
that
it goes like
feel...
Jamie. Cass was saying somebody like Jamie could smoke and jump in the car and be fine. But
yeah, I feel totally comfortable with that. I know I'm very familiar with it, and I'm comfortable with that. There are people that aren't comfortable with that, and I think somebody who's not comfortable with that from using cannabis is more apt to not drive than somebody whose inhibitions are
drunk.
Right, there's a difference.
Drunk, and would just. Yeah. So I think that's why there's less issue.
The campaign that Cass is really supporting. I agree. Everyone needs to be aware. Driving is not safe. I agree with that. I do say, though, that going into court sometimes is more dangerous than driving on some days. Yeah. But driving is where most people put themselves at risk.
Every day.
And it's not even you. It's the other people that you got to be worried about. And I get that. People. So, and there are a lot of accidents, a lot of weird stuff out there. It's but nobody is advocating for it, and everybody should be aware of how cannabis affects them. Yep. And there should be education on that and learning. I fear that if the messaging gets conflated, it kind of, like the police, like click it, ticket, or you drink, you drive, you go to jail stuff. I mean, you heard me earlier. I was joking about revisiting prohibition, but there are people that can have one beer, 2 beers, and drive. Whereas the smell of it and running someone through some funky test, you get up with an arrest, it's on your breath, it's all witchcraft, and you got a case. You know what I mean? So I'm saying there's a way that it's cut. And the reason why people get convicted is because the folklore of that ticket of .08, people show up and they think they know what it means. They have no idea what that number means. You know what I mean? But because the folklore, the social, legal mantras, the propaganda, it's just it's already built in. They've already convinced the jury that, and the the instructions are, if they have that, then you got to convict them. It's per se. So I just worry about that from a where we lose our objectivity on this thing. I think we're all being very objective in terms of it does impair, unequivocal. No one's fighting about that.
I had the old prosecutor of Monroe County. I think he's a judge now. And it was a thing I went and spoke at for Proposal 1 deal. And, he came up and was talking to me after. And, I let him know my perspective of 20 years of police work. And never one time did I have somebody that I thought was impaired solely by marijuana. And he says, we get them all the time, is what he tells me. I said, oh, yeah? He said, yeah, I got 3 fatal car accidents on my desk right now that marijuana is the factor. I said, really? I said, I'd like to see those. Was alcohol involved as well? He drops his head. Yeah, they all have alcohol involved. I'm like, there's your X factor. And I followed that up with, I said, I tell everybody this that I talked to, that marijuana is like any other medication, or like a lot of other medications, and it does not mix well with alcohol. If you want to get fucked up, add alcohol to
Never do both,
your
man.
cannabis.
I mean, I haven't had a drink in years, but I have a hard time handling both together.
Yeah.
Hey, Michael, if you want
Alcohol's
to, man,
poison. In case anybody didn't recall that.
It is.
No,
Okay.
yes.
Jamie, I'm doing one before.
Literal poison.
Jamie, I do want
Go ahead,
to.
man,
I want to move on. I do. I'm sorry.
gotta take a
I get all hunkered down about the driving. Thank you for indulging me about that, because I want to ask you a bunch of questions about
How'd we get
testing
veered off into that
and
anyway?
labs
Right after the break.
and things like that.
let
But
her
we're gonna
know
take a-
about the Michigan State Police lab and their antics over the years.
It's still going on. I got
really
some more.
great topics for after
Can
the break.
we hang out for a little while longer, Cass?
Sure.
All right, great. We'll take a quick break and be right back.
You're listening
All right.
to Planet Green Trees.
The Planet Green Trees Show.
When you're charged with a crime, you need a real attorney. And here's just a few reasons why. The police, the courts, the labs, the drug tests, probation, the judges, the jails, the prisons, and the entire system is just one big machine. They have one objective. Take your freedom, take your possessions, take your money, take your children, control your life, and destroy your future. You only get one chance to hire the right attorney. One that will stay in your corner. One that will fight for your rights. One that will fight for your freedom. Choose an attorney that's experienced in fighting the justice machine. Attorney Michael Komorn. Knockout victories one case at a time. Komorn Law. Google it. komornlaw.com.
The Planet Green Trees Show.
Join the Michigan Medical Marijuana Association today. MichiganMedicalMarijuana.org. The MMMA is focused on the well-being and safety of medical marijuana patients. The MMMA site provides the most comprehensive and up-to-date news on legal issues, politics, research, cultivation, as well as the various strange products and methods of cannabis use. Come join the discussion with the most knowledgeable and passionate advocates in Michigan today. MichiganMedicalMarijuana.org.
lock the door and throw away the key. But there's someone in my head, but it's not me.
An important and historical farm crop in American agriculture is returned after having been classified as a controlled substance and illegal. On December 20th, 2018, the President signed the Farm Bill, also known as the Agriculture Improvement Act of 2018, into law. The signing of the act was great news for the hemp industry, which amended the definition of marijuana in the Federal Controlled Substances Act. Hemp is now defined as the plant, cannabis sativa L, and any part of the plant, growing or not, with less than 0.3% THC concentration on a dry basis. The plant itself is no longer a controlled substance. Hemp is one of the most versatile plants on earth. From clothing, fiber, paper, building materials, hempcrete, biofuels, CBD, and medical uses, it has been a part of America's industry for over 200 years. Even the United States Constitution was drafted on hemp paper. The time is now. If you're thinking of getting in the farming or processing of hemp, contact our global experts, legal, and consultation teams to make sure that you're on the right road when you venture into the new hemp industrial revolution. Michigan Hemp Industries has been a leader and advocate for the return of the hemp industry, so come be a part of the new revolution in agriculture in Michigan.
Bill Schuette led the charge against medical marijuana, and even after the will of the voters was decided and the support was enormous, he still continued to fight against the will of the voters, keeping patients from the medicine that they need. So I think it's important that we all speak up on what we think about this initiative. But when the voters have their say, their will must stand.
I am Earl from G3 Cannabis Therapy Network, and you are watching Planet Green Trees, the original and #1 podcast in Michigan for all things cannabis and legal news.
Here's Michael Komorn with more Planet Green Trees.
You know, smoke them up. Call it good. Do some dabs.
Thanks for staying with us. Planet Green Trees, 539.
539.
Blatherskite. That may have been what I was doing there. I named it Blatherskite in a little bit. But, Jeff, you remember when is Jeff still there?
Yes.
Okay. I incidentally, we're now involved with this case. We're heading up to the old land of where the magistrate's not a lawyer. And the magistrate's also the probation officer,
We're
the
going
collection
up
agent.
tomorrow, Jeff.
And the former prosecutor is the judge.
Yes.
And I think she's the district court judge and the circuit court judge.
That's a lot of judge.
This is a weird place. This is a weird place. It's like the alt universe of.
And the non-lawyer of the
non-lawyer magistrate
is the magistrate, the probation officer.
That's efficient.
And the court administrator.
It's very efficient.
Right?
Very efficient.
And the clerk.
So it's just the two of them? They run the whole show.
It's better that way.
I take all their salaries individually, too, probably.
I mean, understand that magistrates have the authority to sign a search warrant.
They sure do.
Which, when given to a peace officer, they can execute it by kicking in your door.
Right.
Understand that this individual that I'm describing as a magistrate does not have to be a lawyer. Not that lawyers, but at least they've gone to school, they've passed a bar exam.
They have to go to like an 8-hour course in Lansing, don't they?
No.
I'm pretty sure they do.
Maybe.
There's a little thing.
How can you teach probable cause?
Apparently.
In an 8-hour.
I mean, I don't think you have to have any educational level to be a magistrate. Is that true?
You know, it's really interesting. The language is the references to neutral and detached magistrate, right? So I think in the word game, it's a magistrate, but like the idea, I don't know. I wonder if other lawyers knew that, like some non-lawyer snuck in and got a title of magistrate, what they would feel about that. I did not feel good. Not that it's just there's a certain, you just know that.
It just doesn't seem right.
Well, everybody that we're dealing with in this situation at least has gone through, and they're supposed to have, there's this presumption that they've, had a certain level of education.
The decisions that they make significantly impact people, and they should probably be professionally trained in the law.
It's out of logically speaking, it's out of the. It's unexpected. It's like an asteroid crashing into a planet, kind of. All right, back to the. Thanks for staying with us for that. But that's what we got. Me and Steve are talking about our strategies for that. So I mentioned the lab testing here. I know, and maybe you can speak on this, Cass. That I'm aware of a couple. Things that have been going on with the Michigan's. I'm talking the commercial industry's labs in terms of. There was a debate over the different types of testing methods that were used. You've got the plating, the old school traditional way of testing for mold and other
contaminants,
microbes. And then also there's this newer version of the QVRC or QVPC, whatever it is, that will be the way of the future. It's less expensive. But the data's not there to really support it. There's a debate of the different, and I think there was a third party that came in and addressed some of this. But nevertheless, this kind of things are happening. I think it's still existing, at least in Michigan. You can go to one particular lab and fail, or going to go to another lab and pass, same product, and you may even get different results in terms of the
error rates on.
Well, we're not even at it, but I'm saying in terms of what the THC amounts are, because that's what sells, whether that's an accurate reason or not is another story, but that's what's assuming that's the, most in demand.
Sounds like there's about zero consistency across.
Well, do you have any comments about? I mean, the other point I was just throwing before you answer. The amount of THC in the plant is just on average from the testing would show like an increase on a giraffe like this, and it wouldn't be logical for it to go in that direction from whatever was testing out in 2016 to, whatever. A lot of them. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to be too much of an increase. But what are your thoughts on that? Any kind of?
I have so many thoughts. I just break it down into little pieces. So almost all of the labs at this point I've tested with. I like to do quarterly shotguns where I take samples from the same batch, get them out to all the labs. I bring the data back in, and I say, are the labs close to each other or not? Nice. And you have to be close to each other, or I'm not using you as a lab. It's just how it works. And that's for potency, microbials, heavy metals, pesticide testing, everything. I want your results to be incredibly similar. As a person who grows plants, I think it's my responsibility to audit the labs and make sure that the supplier of my contracted services, is doing a good job. There is at least one lab in the state that has statistically different potency results than the others.
Oh yeah, which one?
They shall remain not named, because I all the labs that I work with, I'm very specific. Hey guys, I'm collecting this information. It's not for me to
Can I ask this question? Are they in the
shake it out in the world? But there is one that is statistically different than all of the others.
Let me ask you this: Is this a entity that is not in? It is in one of the two trade organizations, but it's not in the industry association.
I'm not aware of their industry association credentials, so
I'm saying, do you know of them to be in the MCMA?
I do not.
Okay, never mind. I thought I could squeak that out. Go ahead. So keep going.
So we do have that. As far as potency being exponential, let us be very specific. It does not take a lot to cross breed plants and be specific for only potency. Now, we may act like it's been a handful of years, but for the last 20 years, breeders have been crossbreeding and back-crossing plants to increase potency. I'm not entirely sure why, because oftentimes that leads to smaller plants and less flavorful plants, but that is the case. And at the same time, increasing the wattage and spectrum of the light that the plants are growing under, and also dialing in the micronutrients to make sure that the plant is producing as much as it wants. And I can remember, growing 20 years ago, and potency was down around 8%, okay? I can grow plants today that are in the above 25% using basically the same methods, except for I'm now using LED lights, okay? But, similar nutrients, I still grow in soil. I've definitely seen that. I've watched people pheno hunt for THC that's higher. This is what people have been doing for the last 20, almost 30 years. It's not an exponential change. What's exponentially different is the amount of testing that's being performed. At my cultivation facility, we have stuff that tests in from 12 to almost 30. And that's because we grow different kinds of medicine for different people. That's just how it is. As far as microbial concerns, I still think it's quite funny that the rapid Petri plating from 3M is considered the old school method when it has been invented in the last 10 years. And so has qPCR. So they have similar histories. There is another form of plating, which is not the method that most labs in the state use, that requires incubation for between 14 and 28 days. It's not a rapid test. And that's been around since, like the 50s, maybe even before, right? It's the original type of plating where you're having a stock agar and you're growing microbial organisms there, and you're putting it in, an incubator at an appropriate temperature so that growth is promoted, right? And then you're counting the colonies that are grown. I thought it was quite interesting coming here and hearing people fight over technologies that have been used in other industries for a decade as though they were so novel that they shouldn't be able to be used. And I think it's quite interesting that because of that fight, hundreds of labs across the nation got together with AOAC to perform the validations to move forward and say all of these tests from all of these companies are equivalent. At this point, there's 8 of these testing methods, including the 3M plating, that have been validated, by inter-laboratory tests. I think it's interesting that Michigan made that happen. Thank you, Michigan. Usually it takes, about 10 years, 15 years for AOAC to do basically anything, and they managed to do this in about 6 months. So I thought that was pretty great, honestly.
The QVPC is not one of the validated methods.
So there is one by bioMérieux that uses PCR. And there's another one by Pathogen DX that went through the AOAC validation process in September and should come out in AOAC only issues quarterly method package updates. So it should come out in this next quarter.
All right. And I understand what you're saying. The information I had was that some of the labs were using the unvalidated. It doesn't mean that they weren't accurate, but they just didn't have the validation. And there was an independent third party that came in. They were able to establish the distinctions of some passing and some not passing. I think the idea is that it may have been around, but they couldn't support it by the data. And I know what that means in terms of the validation testing and the procedures determining the error rates and the ability to produce the same result as science would dictate over and over and over again using the same methods and procedures. So, and then in doing so to figure out what their, error budget or their uncertainty budget would be. But none of them do that. And there's no requirement of that. The state doesn't require that. So what?
The state does require it. Actually, it has. That's not new. Well, it's always required it.
The labs have to have an error rate, but it's not reported. No one's requiring it to be reported.
It's 100% reported in their validation reports that have to be made available to the agency.
Not on the products.
No.
Right.
Well, the product actually has to now be labeled with these results could vary by plus or minus 10%.
Okay. The point is this: the determination of what the uncertainty budget is or what the error rate is it's determined by the industry. It's not at a level that would equate to I know, and I'm not suggesting absolute certainty on anything, but the measurements there are driven by the data produced by the labs themselves. They're the ones that usually determine their the formula for their uncertainty budget, and they rely on their own data for validation. I've seen some oddities within the state police's own formulas, representations of things that don't equate to what they profess as they testify about it to declare a certain amount. But there's a difference, of course, that should be recognized here of what we would call in the private sphere testing and what the appropriate industry standards would be for uncertainty measurements. When I'm talking about lab certainties, for blood or other types of samples, then it's 25% uncertainty, which really which doesn't really show much, and to try to validate the 25%. But I'm saying, but that is a different issue, and I think that in forensic science, forensic lab is a different animal than the ISO certified. Like all of them have an ISO certification, which is the first rung. But then if you're going to be, testifying as a authority on a particular subject matter, you should be held to a higher standard of validation and certainty that is in the scientific community of others that are in the forensic science field. That's all I'm saying.
No, for sure. And, ISO accreditation doesn't mean that your methods are good.
Yeah, that's right.
It doesn't mean that your technicians are well-trained or that your quality system is working. What it means is that you wrote all the things down and said you were going to do them. Whether or not you're actually doing them, someone else has to constantly check. That's why I do supplier control checks, right? Like I go out and I say, okay, so you have your ISO accreditation, show me a method validation packet that matches what your SOP said you were going to do. Then, not all of them have that, right? And not all of them are calibrating on the frequency that one might expect. And not all of them have laboratory investigation processes for when things fail that you would expect to see.
How about this?
That's just how it is.
No, I know,
And,
I know. And there's so many factors that are important in order for them to get to that validation process. And I just offer this one thing because it's fascinating, and I share it because this is the way of the world in forensic science within the Michigan State Forensic Science Division, #Crime Factory. The process of when they draw blood, there's a whole kit that the officer has to follow. You know, you got to get is it phlebologist? They got the nurse, and they're doing this. They got to watch it. There's a tube that they get. It's got some kind of nitrate or something in it that when they get it, they're supposed to shake it to prevent the clotting or compromising of the blood sample. That so that it is a valid sample and it can be tested. So the issue comes up sometimes is like, how do they determine the knowns, right? They have to have some knowns, and there's a process by which all labs go through. They create their knowns by
knowns and the known unknowns.
Comparing them to other knowns, and then they may change that every couple of years and do some kind of auditing or whatnot. But it turns out that in blood testing for all drugs, essentially, the blood samples that they utilize to, what they do is they get blood, and then they have to add, 2 nanograms of THC to it, and they know that that's 2 nanograms. So then when they splurt the subject sample onto there, they compare it through the computer. So the blood,
they splurt it on there?
So where do they get the blood samples from? Where do they get it from?
The samples of blood?
Yeah, to make the knowns. Because they get from some place.
I always thought it was like from babies, or like virgins that are tied up in the closet.
Makes sense.
It's worse. It's worse.
Wait, from pigs. It's pig blood.
No, it has to be human.
Oh, okay.
What they do is they get expired blood from blood banks and hospitals. Expired blood.
Oh.
So the whole bottom line, the whole
creepy.
Truth level that they're comparing you to arises out of expired blood, which is insane. I just gave you that whole thing of how important it is for them not to expire the blood and the blood test that they're going to send. And when it gets there,
but they use expired blood for the control.
That's what I'm saying.
Welcome to another thing in the world that doesn't make sense.
Do you know how science deals with this? You know how they deal with this? Because ISO only requires there to be some publication. It could have been two people, two tries that they did with, expired blood, and it worked twice out of and
then they're like, it'll be fine.
That publication then is the justification that allows somebody that to go. That's not far from the truth what I just said in terms of how they validate.
No, it's not. Certainly not with ISO, but from like an AOAC or a USP standpoint, it takes hundreds of examples of doing the same thing. And then there's a quarterly review to make sure that the science hasn't changed and that there was not a single person that did it and was like, whoa, I got results that were totally different than the first, 200 people that did it. And there's like a review process that's associated with that. And those are the people who are making sure our food supply is safe and making sure our drug supply that's not cannabis related is safe. And they have decided to do it that way because if they don't do it that way, people die. And that's like the craziest part for me is I came into the cannabis industry from working in an FDA regulated pharmaceutical company, like doing these tests. And I was allowed like plus or minus 1% variation. That was what I was allowed. Right. And my bosses wanted it to be less than that. Right.
And that's the way it
should be.
And
I came into cannabis and they're like plus or minus 30.
Yeah.
Okay? And I was like, I can swing that all day.
Right.
No problem.
Get on my magic 8-ball and hit that.
Yeah, yes, exactly. I'm just going to wave a wand on it. Hold on. It didn't pass. Hold on. Put it again.
I wonder what kind of, I wonder what that error rate does to when the measurement between hemp, legal THC, and illegal cannabis is based upon a 30% error rate of, 0.3% THC with a 30% error rate. I mean, it's an interesting dynamic. All right, so I was going to ask another thing about. So you are a believer that the integrity of the labs nationwide in terms of the testing of marijuana is on the up and up. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
So I would say that I've experienced probably 70% of labs as being on the up and up. And the 30% of labs that were not on the up and up, it was because they lacked scientific rigor. not because they were intentionally not being on the up and up. I've only encountered 2 labs in the last 10 years that was obvious that they knew that they were doing something wrong. They were ghosting test results, basically not even testing samples and producing certificates of analysis for people. Bogus completely.
So that can't be done. That can be done.
It's physically possible for people to do that.
I saw a Vice episode with a couple of testing labs out west that were cooking the results for financial gain.
Yeah, and I've definitely seen people who are just really stupid and their results were totally bogus too. But like they had no idea. Or they were really, really good actors. Like they were very, very good at being completely stupid in front of you consistently. And when I say this, I mean like, I'd be like, show me your chromatogram, and they would show it to me, and I'd be like, tell me how you integrate, and they'd be like, I just measured the whole line, and it's THC, and I'd be like, yay, yeah, because each one of these little peaks here is different, like it was just so blatant. The guy had no idea what he was doing. I've been places where people were running GCs, and they were 100% certain that they were running a mass spec at the end of their GC, and I looked at it and I was like, well, this is an FID, so I don't know what you've been doing this whole time. I've been places where people were telling me they were testing for residual solvents, and I would ask them to show me their standards, and they'd literally pull out like a thing of Vaseline and be like, that's my standard right there, this Vaseline, it's pure. Like, pure what? Like,
so
that doesn't have any residual solvents in it.
Did you audit these testing labs, or how did you get involved with that?
Yeah, so I have been a consultant for many years in pharmaceuticals. Part of my job as a consultant was to do mock audits for people to prep them for when the FDA would come in. I started doing that similarly with cannabis labs, and then also with cannabis processing facilities about 6 years ago. And then as I worked for cannabis companies, like there was never going to be a chance that I was using any supplier of anything without auditing them, because that's how I had done supplier control when I was working in the FDA regulated space, right? Like, you don't know what you don't know if you don't show up, right? And, you show up to places and they tell you it's organic, and then all of a sudden you walk in and they're, I don't know, it's not organic, okay? And so those kinds of things were important to me. That also meant, at a couple of places, one of the really big companies I was working at, they kept saying that their cannabis was like stupid potent. And I was like, okay, but it doesn't seem like it would be, because it was, kind of undergrown and not well trimmed, and there are other issues. Come to find out, that lab was totally bogus. They'd been cooking the books the whole time. So of course they're going to give the customer what they want was, plus 25% THC. But it wasn't helpful, right? So those kinds of things happen. At this point, I think I've done around 40 or 50 cannabis labs in the United States. So not all of them. I did all but one lab in Colorado. I did all of the labs in Arizona. I've done 7 labs here in Michigan. And some of those labs have multiple locations. So it would actually be closer to like 11 labs in Michigan. Because they have the same SOPs and equipment.
I would say it only takes one lab to ruin the bunch, so to speak, because as the market becomes more competitive, there's fewer licenses, the price is being determined by whatever that measurement is, and if one of these labs is, fixing them a little bit or looking the other way or adding some points here or there, just enough it changes the entire dynamic, because just the drive of that thing, which makes a tiny difference, all right, we're getting close to the end. I want to get through a couple other questions, if you would. How much of the cannabis do you think that's on the shelves for recreational use has been remediated or eradicated or whatever, remediated or somehow
good question
radiated?
Yeah, more than 50%.
Okay,
really.
Is
100%.
Is it true that the organic soil growing of cannabis, as many caregivers do, and I mean in the medical marijuana MMA program, is growing in organic soil inevitably going to fail the testing for medical and even recreational by the mere fact that it is bacteria, not necessarily levels of mold, but bacteria, which will test out as mold. Do you understand?
Bacteria?
No,
So-
I grow in soil on a commercial level that has these beneficial bacteria in them. That is not an issue.
Okay. Do you think that other facilities are growing? I mean, do you think what you're taking the percentage of those that are growing in organic soil versus, other mediums?
It's about 50-50 based on all the tours I've done.
Is it true that there's more risk of having microbial failures if you're growing in organic soil versus the other mediums?
No. So microbial contamination is based on environmental controls. So the temperature in the space and the amount of relative humidity in the space, creating a growing environment for microbial growth. That has nothing to do with the medium that you're growing it in. If you're growing only in water, right, or you're doing flooding beds, you're going to have more humidity that you have to combat, right? You have to take out of the space from the plant. If you're growing at higher temperatures, microbial likes to grow there too. More than it would at like lower temperatures. So, I mean, there are things that impact that, but it doesn't have anything to do with the growing medium itself. It's the control of the consequence of the growing medium. So in this case, making sure you're removing moisture from the environment, reducing temperatures, those kinds of things.
True or false, the actual levels of the microbials that are currently the thresholds of pass-fail are arbitrary? Arbitrary.
Totally arbitrary.
Okay. True or false, most caregivers will pass the rigorous testing of the market if forced to.
Definitely, they will pass, yeah.
Good question.
Is there, or should the community be fearful of untested caregiver cannabis?
Should the community,
I mean,
should the patients that know the caregiver be concerned that their cannabis hasn't been tested?
Has there ever been a reason to have a concern in the state of Michigan? I mean, we had these caregivers from 2008 to 2000, still, and if they're not testing it and they're providing medicine to their patients and they're not required to test it, why is this a thing now? That's another way to ask it.
Yeah, so, I'm not 100% sure why it is a thing for caregivers. At the commercial market, when it first started, it was prohibitionists trying to make it so there would be less cannabis available while also driving up the price because of reduced supply. It was kind of corporations and prohibitionists working together to make sure cannabis stayed expenthere's
Right. The people, like I said, like the people that lost the war are at the table setting the peace.
Yes, exactly. There's one guy once died of aspergillosis related to cannabis once that we have on record.
He had aspergillus. That's not cannabis, but
What is?
So
what is that?
aspergillosis is a kind of mold that we test for in Michigan.
I know
That grows on cannabis,
I
right?
know.
But once, okay, guys, once. It happened once.
No, point being like the vitamin E oil things, the vitamin E oil that caused the problem, not cannabis
right.
itself.
Like,
it's
diluents
this thing
caused the problem.
Right.
Cannabis has been around for generations.
But aspergillus, this is the kind of thing.
Right.
Wait, hold on. Aspergillus happens when plants are moldy,
problem, not it.
Yeah, moldy and dying. It is not a natural occurring phenomenon from the.
No, it would be from lack of appropriate plant care.
Right. So let me give you. So this is an excuse that was used
on the stand by a police lieutenant from a narcotics team,
by a drug task force in Oakland County. That he read an article about aspergillus, and that's why they had to destroy all the plants.
The aspergillus will get you
terrible
every time.
And I got up on the stand and said that they should be disciplined, prosecuted, and lose their job.
He would have written a complaint and turned it over to the prosecutor. That's what Steve testified to. Is he qualified as an expert in how
in the processing of evidence? That was how this went down. That's our story about aspergillus.
So there's not a lot of things that used once or twice accidentally having a mistake would cause a lot of death, right? The adulteration of distillate products we know caused hundreds of hospitalizations and over 60 deaths in the United States that we're aware of, right? So asking those questions and saying, hey, caregivers, don't use diluents because you don't accidentally kill people by putting lipids in their lungs seems appropriate. Saying, hey, don't put this in your products, regardless of whether you test for it, and then making somebody liable for if their patient dies from E-Valley because they put diluents in their distillate. I mean, you don't have to test. The person dies because they got E-Valley.
Right.
You told the person not to do it. The person had trust in their caregiver, right? Like it's not a stranger, okay? It's not me, random person that owns a cultivation processing facility that's, you're never going to meet that you're getting this from, okay? It's like legit your uncle or your friend or a person that you've been working with for the last decade, right? Or your mom. I mean, like literally. So if your mom's trying to poison you, it's probably not through your cannabis.
All right, so here's a couple other ones. The MRA should arguably be considered possibly to be committed to a hospital in that they have removed Delta 8 and Delta 10 so that this regulatory agency, can determine its health and safety.
Did you just suggest that an agency should be committed to a hospital?
I did say that. No, I'm saying because this is something that's being perpetuated of that the MRA is going to be determining the health. Like there's a pharmacy board that is supposed to be scheduling and identifying things, right?
Yeah. Did you know that they said no? So did the FDA. Right? They said these things aren't safe. We don't have any evidence to show they're safe. We shouldn't have them available for sale in any states or in interstate commerce, full stop. And then the MRA came in and said, well, maybe not full stop. What if it can be like all the other cannabis products that we already have here? And we say, as long as you do a little bit of due diligence, and I don't know how much that is, but I imagine it's not very much, then you can have these things.
True or false, the testing requirements for cannabis to pass does not produce a result of the amount of Delta 8 or Delta 10 in the product.
It does include those.
Does?
It does.
Yeah. So the new draft regulations, new technical bulletin for that includes those.
For CBD products.
Oh, wow.
For CBD
no,
products.
for all products. For all products.
I didn't know that.
And for at the USDA level, so for hemp-derived products, it's all products.
No, but the state, I'm saying, the state regulations.
Yeah, so at the state, they rewrote the law to say that total THC, which has to be tested for by the labs and put on the label, now includes Delta 8 and Delta 10 as well as Delta 9. Therefore, when it's tested for, those things have to be in my technical report coming from the lab, and that information has to go on the label. I check for it now. Every batch that comes out of my facility and every batch of products that go to my retail dispensaries, I'm verifying to make sure that it lists non-detected amounts of Delta 8 and Delta 10 on my certificate of analysis every single time.
Well, then it would seem to me that the current state of the law would require the removal of any and all of those products, including those with trace amounts, from the shelves, because the memorandum said specifically that Delta 8 and Delta 10 is not safe, and
100% should not be on any shelves, correct.
So because I know, for example, that whole plant extract from hemp plants, whole plant hemp extract, or just whatever it was from would have Delta 8 in it, and trace amounts just like CBD.
No. It's not a naturally occurring cannabinoid.
I thought it was in trace amounts.
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes. Okay.
Well, how do they get it then if it's not?
It's a semi-synthetic process. It's a conversion product that starts from decarboxylated cannabidiol. It's not a naturally occurring thing. I've looked at actually probably close to tens of thousands of live plant results, and I've never seen Delta 8 in anything that wasn't remediated. So it had to have been exposed to intense light and ozonation to have experienced this, which, is one of the remediation processes that exists out there. Never seen it any other way. I know there's a lot of people who are like, oh, I'm totally growing D8 plants. Yeah? No.
No, but I'm saying I'm aware that there's a conversion process, some molecular shifting of some kind that takes the naturally occurring molecules, whichever ones they are, and can convert them to delta 8 or delta 10. I'm aware of that. But I also have the impression that the hemp plant, or all cannabis sativa plants, have naturally occurring delta 8, that it does naturally occur in trace amounts. I could be wrong, but this is the information I had, because...
But that gets discussed. I've never
seen it. And the leading scientist that's been doing this work on these cannabinoids has found more than 1,000 of them in nature, right? Straight out of Israel. This is what the man does. He's been doing it since the 60s. He hasn't found it in nature either. He was able to make it in his lab, and was pretty excited about it, right? He's been able to make lots of things in his lab, but this is not, will there be plants in the future that make this because people want to grow it? Perhaps. It's just like we didn't have CBG plants 4 years ago. Then people really wanted that. They bred for it. Now we have CBG specific plants, right? There's people who have many times tried to tell me that THCV is a naturally occurring thing. I've had people tell me that hydrolyzed THC is a naturally occurring thing.
But I thought in the plant there were like so many different cannabinoids and stuff. And
there's hundreds.
So wouldn't the delta 8 and the delta 10 and all of that stuff be?
First of all, just based on what you said before, that we shouldn't be surprised that the breeding of plants over time would produce X amount. It's easy, blah, blah, blah. I mean, if we accept that, wouldn't it make sense that in the course of that breeding, it's either an offshoot, a genetic, malfunction, or genetic whatever, and it's more prevalent. Maybe it's more, or maybe we weren't testing for it before. I had heard, and I see, because Rob Robar on the show last week, Helping Hand sponsor at times, and Helping Friendly. He had many products made by, says, full spectrum hemp, which is then, made into lotions or whatever he does, and maybe there's some gummies or whatever. And he was able to sell them as long as they were tested through the licensed facilities. He could also sell them to gas stations, and there shouldn't, at the same time.
Not anymore.
Well,
not in Michigan.
Okay, we'll see. Do you think the MSP is gearing up to go into Plum Market and Whole Foods? Is that going to happen?
Yeah, I'll tell you.
I mean,
they're doing it in Texas, and they're doing it in Georgia, and they're doing it in North Carolina, and they're doing it in California. Do I think that they will also do it here in Michigan? I haven't been here long enough to know if the law enforcement establishment cares.
Oh, they care.
Yes, they do.
They care.
And you are correct.
But if they do, if they want to crack down on people, they're going to come up with a reason. This is a perfect reason. That's why they create laws like this. Well, the DEA most recently said, I'm sure you guys saw this in the 2 weeks ago. They said, yeah, totally legal. Make all you want. I'm paraphrasing.
Well, the issue of the federal law of what has been defined as hemp is not illegal. There may be some rules and regulations, but it's not a crime. You can travel with it across state lines. You have a manifest establishing that. Yep. I mean, we're obviously, So what I was getting to with Rob's story was that he is pre-October 11th. And this memo that we were reading from was from, I think, October the 9th in anticipation of the 8th or something. But Rob was notified that his products that passed testing were on the shelves of various retailers were removed because there were trace amounts of Delta 8. And he said it's naturally occurring in the plant. And it's so minute, but because they were CBD, they're associating, the MRA is associating hemp and CBD with Delta 8 and Delta 10. And it seemed as if because it was CBD or hemp labeling, they picked that stuff up, tested it, found the trace amounts, and he had to remove it. So he says I wasn't making, none of that is infused with, anything other than the whole plant extract of whatever he does. He wasn't,
I don't know this person, and I haven't been to their facility, so I don't know how they're making it. But I have CBD products in my retail locations that have been tested for Delta-8, and they don't have any. It's not hard to remove Delta-8. It's not hard to remove Delta-9. It can be done. If you want a CBD product that doesn't have other things in it, you make a CBD.
No, I get it.
Right? So,
and I think what the difference is, he's doing this whole plant thing, and I think it's just that's the concept. A lot of people, because we're talking about now the whole plant. If the whole plant CBD has trace amounts of Delta-8, it creates a real problem for the CBD market, so to speak. I think the CBD alone is not an issue. I mean,
I would say, having worked with a lot of people who make these products, that he's probably having some cross-contamination issues at a supplier. People are probably making a much more profitable Delta-8 or Delta-9 conversion product using the same glassware, reactors, etc., for the CBD products. And they are getting trace contamination from that due to a lack of cleanliness. I mean, it happens in facilities all over the country. With D8 even, or with D9 even, like regardless of the conversion products.
So are you saying that the flower grown that's tested for cannabis, we're talking marijuana, and that it is known and disclosed that the flower that we're talking about that's grown has Delta-8 in it, or it doesn't?
It doesn't have Delta-8 in it. And it's tested to say that it says clearly that it doesn't. I would love to see some amazing genetics that have Delta-8 in it. I might even grow some in my facility for research and development purposes.
I'm sorry, it's weird. I'm not doubting anything you're saying is being.
I think what she's saying, Michael, is his products, if they're tested at a facility that doesn't have very good cleanliness standards, that some trace amounts of Delta-8 from the last product tested might get into Rob's product.
Understood, but
then that's where he got the trace amounts of Delta-8 that got to be pulled off the shelf.
There's dozens of CBD products that don't have Delta-8 in them. Like this is
right, and I think
this is all day, every day.
No, I got it. But I think if you're talking about the whole plant versus an extraction of just CBD that's run through something, you got a lesser chance of having a small trace amount.
I carry full plant extracts in my facility. I don't have problems with this. I don't know. I would love to see his product. I'd love to see the plants that his product are made out of. I'd love to know where it got harvested. I love to see the cleanliness practices of the people who are using it. It would be great if these plants actually existed. It would there are some cases that are carrying on in other states that are saying because it's not naturally occurring in the plant, therefore it's synthetic, therefore it's illegal, mostly in Texas. I would love to see that. Right now, I don't have that evidence. Because I don't have that evidence, I can't help the people who are down there in this way from a scientific standpoint. I've been actively seeking this information since the second half of 2018, when I first started seeing conversions happening in large quantities. So, the same people who were making CBD isolate products and found that those weren't profitable almost immediately turned to making the intoxicating Delta-8 products. It
is a natural cannabinoid. We agree about that, right?
It is a semi-synthetic cannabinoid.
I don't know. I don't know enough about it, but I'm seeing. I
have no academic information to support that it's naturally occurring. So I've never seen it myself, and I don't know anyone who has seen it as a naturally occurring. 100% conversion product has been being made in labs since the late 60s. So it's not new either, right? This has been around for a long time.
I'm not disagreeing. Well, see, because I'm not disagreeing that people manipulate cannabinoids to produce it. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but I think that again, I don't know enough about it. Reading and nobody said anything last week when Rob was talking about this. His theory was it's naturally occurring.
I thought that trace amounts were naturally occurring. I have nothing to prove.
I've never seen that, right?
I just heard that in discussion. That's all.
When you think about what trace amounts means, okay, in a hemp plant, trace amounts mean like
0.3% or less.
Let's talk about what that means, though. That means like 30 parts per billion. Okay, that's a trace amount. That's what we can detect. That's what we can quantify. Okay, we can detect even less than that. Okay, so if we're talking about, hey, I'm testing a plant and I can quantify 30 parts per billion, right? And I can detect, say, 5 parts per billion. I should be able to detect this in a plant if it's naturally occurring, even if it's in trace amounts.
Well, a CBD or hemp product would be one that by legal definition is 0.3% or less THC. That would be described as trace amounts. So if anything below that amount or low would fall into the category. And I listen, if it is naturally occurring, you're saying it's synthetic, right? That's what we don't. I have nothing to. I don't have any specific depth in this, but
I think like with the synthetic thing, it's, you have maybe trace amounts in the plant, and then you take a bunch of that plant and then you process it and spray on to your hemp flower.
No.
Delta 8.
You're taking CBD that is incredibly cheap. You're applying reagents to it that are also incredibly cheap. You're converting this material in a semi-unsafe manner because, it is a dangerous exothermic reaction. Now you have a conversion product. If you care at all, you use chromatography to filter that product and make sure it's just Delta 8, because you're also going to have produced some Delta 9. And then you're spraying you're spraying your hemp flower with it. You're making distillate stuff out of it. You're putting it in your edibles. And I have dozens of friends that this is what they do across the country. It's an industry. I support the industry. It would be awesome, I think, if we could have plants that would grow, THCP and THCV and Delta 8 and Delta 10 and Delta 6, 7A and like all of these things. That would be, if we could have plants that's what it did. And I think at some point, we'll have more GMO plants that will do these things. I just haven't seen them now. And that doesn't mean that they don't physically exist in the universe, but they're not commercially available. And because they're not commercially available, you're not going to be able to produce large quantities of anything from them. And when I say large quantities of anything, if you're commercially producing batches of, say, 10,000 units, that's going to have taken an acre or two of plants, right? We're not talking about one random mutant plant somewhere. We're talking about acres of plants were going to be needed for this. I would love to see it. I really would. I have people in Texas right now that are being prosecuted by the Texas authorities that if they could prove that this was a natural product and not just a synthetic product, would not go to jail for the rest of their lives.
Take this number down. Jeff Frazier. What's the number, Jeff?
I wouldn't be playing
Jeff's
around
in Texas. Jeff's in Texas. He's waiting for that call right now.
So you know what I'm talking about. You see these people getting arrested. It's happening all the time. The Texas guys have been busting people for last year on that.
I'll fly down there. I got to have a reason to go down there. This is it. I want to do this. It's great. I got a cousin that's a former prosecutor down there. So please give me a reason to fly down there. Here you go.
You should totally go. People need help down there.
I want to go where I can offer help.
I thought the judge blocked that or something.
The National Cancer Institute defined the Delta 8 THC in a statement as an analog of THC that contains neuroprotective properties that can increase appetite, reduce nausea, anxiety, and pain. It produces some psychotropic effects that are believed to be less potent than Delta 9, the primary form of THC found in cannabis. They identified as a naturally occurring cannabinoid, but
did they say who identified it in a plant as naturally occurring?
This is the Hemp Grower magazine referring to National Cancer.
Hemp magazine. Okay.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying it may be bred into it. I don't know. I really don't know, and I don't want to. But I'm saying
it could be, and I would love to see it, and I would love to grow it, and I 100% would love to have the data from whoever is growing it, so that we can get it out and make sure that the people who are being prosecuted, for making synthetic THC, are no like they have a defense. They can say it came from a plant. Right. That would be amazing.
Well, exactly, and I would say this that I don't have any personal knowledge. That's why but I was under this impression that it had some, and this is the conversation narrative that I've been involved in, where I've, taken the next logical step of, wait a second, if that's true, then there's the possibility that all cannabis plants may have trace amounts of THC, including hemp or including cannabis, whatever. And what they're going to just start pulling stuff off the shelf. I mean, I may be a little hyper dramatic, but I'm saying, you could see something like that happening if what I'm saying is true. Or, pulling all the CBD products because they have trace amounts in there because it's naturally occurring. Anyways, I don't know enough, but I'm saying this is under that narrative that I was accepting and not questioning, these are maybe plausible if it gets to that. But
I think perhaps one individual may have been impacted by some supplier issues. We test all of the products in my facility.
Sure, I know.
With multiple labs, and I'm not seeing this issue. I feel like if it was naturally occurring in trace amounts that were going to get concentrated in these concentrates, we would see it. There would be a prevalence, right? It would be everywhere, and it is not.
Well, no, it's cheaper to make it from CBD.
Oh yeah, so much cheaper.
Yeah.
I can make it for like 4 cents a gram, right? From CBD. It's all toluene, sulfonic acid, all kind of bad shit, man. Yeah, it's pretty nasty process, but I'll tell you, there's a lot of nasty processes out there. The first time I made CBD isolate, I made it in a reactor with pentane. Nobody likes pentane. It worked. I have friends that use chloroform to do their extracts, right? Chloroform's pretty dangerous, right? So
here's the final question. What is the current market of the market? What percentage of it is vaping? Vaping oil instead of like flower smoking, or carts. What would you say? And I'm trying to find a category that covers all the things I'm talking about, like not food, but vaping or carts.
Yeah.
Concentrates, I guess, is what it would be called. What do you think the percentage of the? We could probably figure out. What do you know the marketplace to be the percentage of it being?
So, according to the MRA data on sales in the States, around 45%.
Do you think that's going to stay at that, or is it going to go up?
The national average is right around 50, so maybe a little bit, but not too much.
You don't think it's going to ever take over for a good old flowery?
I used to think that it would. I think that it will be a higher percentage than edibles and flour, but I don't think it will be only cartridges. I think there will always be other consumption methods. I think concentrates that aren't in cartridges still, hold like that 10% of the market share too.
You think like the sponge things and like all that?
Like the dabs, all those will be there. Plus, all of the, infused things like the edibles, the gummies, the chocolates, the brownies, and then also the topicals and the bath bombs. Man, what I wouldn't do right now for a THC infused bath bomb.
Yeah, right here. That's interesting. So, all right. So is there? This is what I was going to ask you. Final question. What do you think that hasn't happened yet? I know we're talking about different methods of whatever. Is this something that you foresee that new kind of method of ingestion, or something that's going to create any like revolutionary or significant change to cannabis? I'm interested to see if that number 50% is the national average of the cart. If that's a draw for people to get in. What is cannabis use? Is it it's going to be one or the other of those? Yeah, I know there's a lot of other methods, but generally speaking, if you're identifying that user, and there's, different people have pros and cons for that, but it may depend, is the future market more adaptable to be brought in for, not smoking it, but vaping it? Is that going to be a thing? You know what I mean? Is that less, whatever. Yeah, I'm just saying, there's all different ways that it could change this. If we're talking about the population over time is going to be, 50,
I think
70.
The casual consumer will be interested in microdosing. That's what we're seeing from the West Coast forward. I think microdosing is mostly in edibles. I think that there is a casual cannabis consumer out there that has been a beer drinker or a cocktail drinker or a spiked seltzer drinker for most of their adult life, and are interested in trying cannabis, and so they're looking for drinks, which we now get to have here in Michigan.
Like a dessert tea.
Yeah. Yes.
Nothing like a dessert tea.
Yeah.
Okay.
I make a good one, Cass.
I'm going to try real hard. We got our processing center's coming up. We got a
sure
full-scale
did.
bottling line in there. It's going to be good times.
Nice.
You should get me in there helping out, Jamie. I make a good dessert tea.
Hey.
He's got a knack for it.
Hey, we're hiring, so you know. Okay. But yeah, I mean I feel like that's the direction.
Maybe we'll discuss a licensing agreement. He can't be hired away. He's got too many. I'm just kidding.
I got too many responsibilities here at the law office.
It's good. But yeah, I really feel like that's that. And I think that's because, right now, 80% of our customers are historically heavy cannabis users.
Right.
Okay. And the almost 70% of all other humans on the planet, the ones that might maybe become cannabis consumers, are probably not going to be heavy cannabis users. So that means they're going to have an alternate way of consuming, where they're not going to get that same level of elevation and inebriation that the heavy cannabis users have been enjoying most of their lives.
You know what I just realized?
Right?
You know what I think is going to happen? What about if they get into the drinking, like you mentioned, and then all of a sudden there's like that it just rolls right into like we drink and consume alcohol, but it becomes a beverage ingesting thing. That could happen. That could probably happen sooner than in terms of social.
That would be fun.
You know what I mean? Where they
that
just
would be fun. A place where you just go for cannabis infused cocktails.
Hey, did you know that my company is literally opening a place where you can do that in Kalkaska?
That is so much fun.
We'll have mixed cocktails, no booze, THC infused.
Right. I'm saying that's
probably even make a THC beer that has no alcohol but tastes like beer.
There you go. I'm saying
100%.
It's kind of, I'm just saying the stigma of the social use of cannabis in front of others is still taboo. That's always been. I know we both agree about that as a messaging, and I hate to even suggest this, but the idea of it becoming consumed exclusively by liquid is.
I can see. That's my preference.
We're bringing House of Saka, the #3 brand in the nation, to Michigan. It's infused wine, Chardonnay, and Pinot Noir, and single serve mimosas.
Is that alcohol and cannabis infused? The two of them?
So you remove the alcohol and infuse it with cannabis. But it tastes like wine.
Okay.
But it doesn't have booze in it.
I see. Okay. I was going to say.
It's delightful.
Okay. Because we were about to have overload with the alcohol infused with the cannabis.
And I'm working really hard on bringing these cocktail cordials here, which will be flavored drink mixers that have THC in them that you put in your cocktail.
To be mixed with alcohol?
Yeah. You mix it with alcohol. I know there's people who think that you shouldn't, but there's lots of people out there that really like to be that fucked up.
Well, if you want to get fucked up, it's a good idea.
And I think now we can start talking about having policing in the roads and the concerns and all that danger that goes with the alcohol. Anyways.
It gets drawn into the alcohol.
We got to call it. I'm seeing flashes of, come on, hurry up. It's too much.
We got an early day tomorrow. We got battles to do.
Cass, I can't thank you enough for putting up with us. I appreciate you fielding all the questions.
This was great. Thank
you for inviting me. I really enjoyed the time, guys.
Love the dialogue. Appreciate you so much.
Cass has to come back on because I think there'd be some really interesting discussions surrounding the history of the state police lab and.
We didn't even get into that. We didn't even get into that.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, that's true.
All right. That's a wrap.
All right.
Expired blood. All right. Well, everyone have a great night. Thanks. Talk to everyone next week. Thank you, Cass. Appreciate you.
Bye, you guys.
Bye, everyone.
Good night.
Night.
The Planet Green Trees Show.
When you're charged with a crime, you need a real attorney. And here's just a few reasons why. The police, the courts, the labs, the drug tests, probation, the judges, the jails, the prisons, and the entire system is just one big machine. The have one objective. Take your freedom, take your possessions, take your money, take your children, control your life, and destroy your future. You only get one chance to hire the right attorney. One that will stay in your corner. One that will fight for your rights. One that will fight for your freedom. Choose an attorney that's experienced in fighting the justice machine. Attorney Michael Komorn. Knockout victories one case at a time. Komorn Law. Google it. komornlaw.com.
Join the Michigan Medical Marijuana Association today. MichiganMedicalMarijuana.org. The MMMA is focused on the well-being and safety of medical marijuana patients. The MMMA site provides the most comprehensive and up-to-date news on legal issues, politics, research, cultivation, as well as the various strange products and methods of cannabis use. Come join the discussion with the most knowledgeable and passionate advocates in Michigan today. MichiganMedicalMarijuana.org. Join the Michigan Medical Marijuana Association today. MichiganMedicalMarijuana.org. The MMMA is focused on the well-being and safety of medical marijuana patients. The MMMA site provides the most comprehensive and up-to-date news on legal issues, politics, research, cultivation, as well as the various strange products and methods of cannabis use. Come join the discussion with the most knowledgeable and passionate advocates in Michigan today. MichiganMedicalMarijuana.org.
Hi, I'm attorney Michael Komorn of Komorn Law PLC, and you are watching Planet Green Trees.
The Planet Green Trees Show.
Join the Michigan Medical Marijuana Association today. MichiganMedicalMarijuana.org. The MMMA is focused on the well-being and safety of medical marijuana patients. The MMMA site provides the most comprehensive and up-to-date news on legal issues, politics, research, cultivation, as well as the various strange products and methods of cannabis use. Come join the discussion with the most knowledgeable and passionate advocates in Michigan today. MichiganMedicalMarijuana.org.
Before you plea, call me, attorney Michael Komorn.
An important and historical farm crop in American agriculture is returned after having been classified as a controlled substance and illegal. On December 20th, 2018, the President signed the Farm Bill, also known as the Agriculture Improvement Act of 2018, into law. The signing of the act was great news for the hemp industry, which amended the definition of marijuana in the Federal Controlled Substances Act. Hemp is now defined as the plant, cannabis sativa L, and any part of the plant, growing or not, with less than 0.3% THC concentration on a dry basis. The plant itself is no longer a controlled substance. Hemp is one of the most versatile plants on earth. From clothing, fiber, paper, building materials, hempcrete, biofuels, CBD, and medical uses, it has been a part of America's industry for over 200 years. Even the United States Constitution was drafted on hemp paper. The time is now. If you're thinking of getting in the farming or processing of hemp, contact our global experts, legal, and consultation teams to make sure that you're on the right road when you venture into the new hemp industrial revolution. Michigan Hemp Industries has been a leader and advocate for the return of the hemp industry, so come be a part of the new revolution in agriculture in Michigan.
am Earl from G3 Cannabis Therapy Network, and you are watching Planet Green Trees, the original and #1 podcast in Michigan for all things cannabis and legal news.